The happy life of a fun seeker in Marvel. This video is purely for entertainment and does not infringe on copyrights or laws. The rights to the novel and image belong to the original author. We do not claim ownership. Don't like waiting and want to listen to this fanfic in full now? Subscribe to our Patreon, where you'll find the best fanfics. Chapter 26 Return to Life. Sherlock didn't know how Tony dealt with SHIELD, nor did he want to know. After killing Obadiah Stane, Sherlock felt a sense of relief, like a weight had finally been lifted off his shoulders. Even when he woke up the next morning, the feeling persisted. The ever-present sense of freedom made Sherlock decide to pursue his pre-time travel dreams. While homesickness kept Sherlock from returning to the vast eastern land, that didn't stop him from embarking on a truly epic time travel adventure across the ocean to the Lighthouse Nation. Furthermore, everything was ready when he arrived: an American V8, a time travel artifact known as Fuck the Environmental Protection, a giant raptor that had enraged the environmentalist girl, and no financial worries. Combined with his own magical powers and the portal authorized by the Ancient One, Sherlock could even drive through the diverse American landscapes during the day, lock up his car, go home, and continue his journey the next day. Of course, that wouldn't be the best experience, so Sherlock made a bold decision: buy a tent. Even if he didn't go home to sleep in the tent, Sherlock could still use magic to sleep in a 3-bedroom apartment. Damn it, how could magic be so inconvenient? Immediately, Sherlock greeted the shop owner and drove to the largest local outdoor goods store. After a long day of shopping, Sherlock practically filled the bed of his Raptor pickup truck to the brim with goodies and returned to his shop. For the next few days, Sherlock didn't appear on the couch in his shop, instead tinkering with the necessary equipment in his room. Honestly, Sherlock hadn't expected a 3-bedroom magic tent to be so difficult to build. It wasn't something Sherlock had imagined could be accomplished with just a few traceless expansion spells. Fortunately, the magical library had a wide range of books, and after a failed attempt, Sherlock successfully found a book titled How to Make a Magic Tent. Sherlock practically made it himself while looking at the secretary, praising the great magic. After completing it, Sherlock felt a surge of accomplishment. Of course, there were ways to save the trouble. This item was considered an alchemical product in Sherlock's library and sold in another vending machine, but at that price. Sherlock could only think, I have that much spare money, so I'd buy some potions and enjoy the thrill of opening a blind box. Besides, the wizarding world's appreciation for items from the Muggle world is, well, hard to put into words. Sherlock even wondered if he actually bought a wizarding tent, and if he ran into fellow travelers during his time travel, he'd be ridiculed. Think of the Grand Quidditch World Cup in 4th grade in the original Harry Potter books. Any of those would be incredibly impressive in the Muggle world. And with a mindset of riding a bike to the bar and saving what possible, Sherlock also felt it was more reliable to make this thing himself. After all, the various consumables were about twice as cheap as those in vending machines. After completing all the preparations, Sherlock confidently carried all the equipment he had prepared downstairs and began loading it into the back of his pickup truck. Just as he had loaded all his equipment and checked the condition of his car, Sherlock had just taken the driver's seat and was about to leave when the roar of an engine could be heard from afar. At first, Sherlock didn't pay much attention, but soon, an Audi R8 sports car appeared in Sherlock's sight and stopped Sherlock just as he was about to leave. Soon, Sherlock knew who could do such a dangerous thing: his good uncle, Tony Stark. Watching Tony whiz out of his supercar, walk to the window of his Raptor, and knock, Sherlock opened the window with a look of resignation, staring at the flamboyant man who had recently declared himself Iron Man. "Dear Uncle Tony, what can I do for you? If not, I'd like to get going as soon as possible." Tony remained unfazed by Sherlock's sarcastic tone. He raised his brows slightly, looking at Sherlock with a half-smile. "It seems I just helped my dear nephew escape some troublesome investigation, and now he's about to abandon me. By the way, Sherlock, do you think I should talk to that tough-looking one-eyed man about the magician's incredible display the other night?" Faced with Tony's naked, undisguised threat, was Sherlock the type to be intimidated? Unfortunately, he wasn't. After hearing Tony's threat, Sherlock put on a fawning smile without hesitation, cautiously exited the car, and ushered Tony into the passenger seat. He was completely servile throughout the process, opening the car door and holding the roof, fearing Tony might even be slightly displeased. "My dear uncle, what are you talking about? Come on, be careful with the steps. Please sit down first, I'll be right back," After helping Tony to the passenger seat, the incredibly servile Sherlock not only went to the store to pour a cup of coffee, but respectfully handed it to Tony, who was already sitting in the passenger seat, before returning to his own driver's seat. Seeing Sherlock's expression, Tony finally nodded in satisfaction. After taking a sip of his coffee, he finally put away his playful expression and looked at Sherlock. "Alright, I've already taken care of SHIELD. I'll just say you're a mysterious figure I met by chance, but I don't know your true identity. They seem to be extremely interested in your magic. Be careful these days. If you don't want to get caught up with those idiots, you'd better be more restrained. Especially with that one-eyed director of theirs. You must be careful, he's not someone you can easily deal with. And I have a feeling there's a lot of water in SHIELD, so stay away from them as much as possible, okay?" After hearing Tony's advice, Sherlock was incredibly happy. After all, with the help of Tony, an insider, Sherlock had saved himself countless troubles, especially during the SHIELD era. Seeing Sherlock about to express his admiration and gratitude, Tony quickly waved her off and asked the question he'd been wanting to ask. "Where are you going after packing so much?" Chapter 27, Return Too Far. Amidst the vast desert, a raptor sped along the road. It was Sherlock, who had been preparing to embark on a road trip, but Sherlock's expression wasn't as excited as it had been at the beginning. The reason was simple: what had been planned as a solo spiritual journey had been abruptly transformed into a two-person trip. "Let's just travel, but look at the legendary Iron Man in the passenger seat, Tony shitbig, he's even traveling in armor." 2 full days had passed since Tony stopped him at his shop, and dear Uncle Tony had spent 2 full days in the passenger seat, wearing his armor. Sherlock looked at Tony with disdain, as he was using the armor's projection to handle group business. His eyes were filled with confusion, and finally, Sherlock couldn't help but complain. "Hey, dear Uncle Tony, if you can't let go of your work, why don't you go back home? Just lying at home watching the American Daddy show and having a few drinks, isn't it much better than sitting in the passenger seat of my car in your armor?" Tony paused at Sherlock's rant before unfurling his armor's visor in a huff, rolling his eyes at Sherlock before speaking. "My dear nephew, it was you who insisted on this self-driving time travel adventure. I have no objection to you traveling. I also suggested flying, but you refused. Then I tried to get an RV so we could watch the American Daddy show together in the evenings, but you also refused. Now, with my net worth of hundreds of billions, I'm sitting in the passenger seat of your rickety pickup truck. What else can you complain about?" Sherlock felt a deep well of complaints simmering inside. The longer he held it in, the angrier he got. He could no longer tolerate Tony. "Tony big shit. Do you even know what a road trip means? Look at the RV you proposed. Can that thing be called an RV? Have you ever seen an RV with 18 wheels that is bomb-proof? Also, we are here for a trip. Why are you wearing your armor? Damn it, I didn't even dare to take you into the town. Damn it, I just wanted to go to the town to experience the local customs and people, but I was welcomed by the mayor himself. Damn it, for a moment I didn't even know whether I was here for a trip or to accompany you to look at investments. And the most important thing is, it's been 2 whole days. I haven't seen you take off your armor. Don't you go to the bathroom? It's so hot, aren't you hot? What kind of good person would go on a road trip in armor?" Sherlock complained fiercely like a machine gun. "I, Sherlock, have something to say, and not only do I have to say it, I have to say it to your face." Tony clearly didn't care for Sherlock's rant. Instead, he rubbed his chin in thought before speaking. "Well, you're right. I should definitely develop a more portable suit. The current suits are a bit inconvenient. Jarvis, take note of this idea and I'll start researching it when I get back. As for the bathroom issue you mentioned, I, a genius, already thought of it when I was designing the suit." Tony then pointed to the crotch of his Iron Man suit and continued. "From the very beginning, I considered the need for extended combat. This part can be folded up for my convenience. And because I'm considering extreme environments, my suit has a purification system built into it. If I can't hold it in any longer, I can do it right inside the suit. The suit can automatically filter and produce pure drinking water. And thanks to your magical potion, I now have many more ways to solve problems." With that, Tony no longer hesitated. He placed his hands on either side of his pelvis and, with a gentle push, released a sound like Lego being pulled apart. Tony lifted his hip axle from his body. The most amazing thing was that the hip axle he held was still attached to the iron suit. Even after removing it, Tony didn't collapse into his chair without support. Instead, he remained as normal as ever, as if an invisible force was still supporting Tony's body even after the hip axle was removed. Even the suit's various functions remained intact. Sherlock's eyebrows twitched as he watched. He finally understood the meaning of the phrase that had been hovering over Tony's head. Physical doll life term effect. The user will transform into an extremely lifelike doll time. 0 hours, 10 minutes, and 8 seconds. So a physical doll life was just like transforming into Lego. But the next second, Sherlock felt his blood pressure suddenly rise. Tony unceremoniously opened the car window, held his hip joint in both hands and stretched it out the window. The next second, a relieved expression crossed Tony's face. Sherlock felt his blood pressure rise at the sight, and he slammed on the brakes to slow down while roaring at Tony. "Tony, big shit. If you dare pee in my car, I'll never let you go." Tony ignored Sherlock's threats. Outside the window lay the deserted desert, and Tony wasn't afraid of being seen. A moment later, Tony retrieved his hip axle from the window and gently pressed it back to its original position. With a crisp pop, Tony's hip axle returned to its original position, and not a crack in the armor was visible, as if Tony's removal of the hip axle had been an illusion. Sherlock actually hoped it was an illusion. Tony's behavior over the past 2 days had completely shattered every Iron Man filter Sherlock had held before his time travel. Sherlock felt like he was on the verge of developing high blood pressure. If possible, the thing Sherlock wanted most right now was to beat up his dear uncle. "Give me back the Iron Man I saw in the movies." Unlike Sherlock, whose filter had been shattered and who felt a sense of despair, Tony himself didn't seem to mind his actions at all, watching the entry that was about to end. At the end of the countdown, a tube emerged from Tony's suit, and Tony, without hesitation, bit down on it and took a sip. Watching Tony drink the potion, Sherlock's frown deepened. After much deliberation, he addressed Tony. "Tony, potions aren't a panacea. The antidote won't always help you. Remember, potions are still medicines, and they develop resistance. If you drink like this, the antidote's effect will diminish. Seriously, if you have time to waste with me, why not go home and research a new suit or a new element?" Tony gave Sherlock a perfunctory nod and said nothing more. The next moment, Tony's expression changed drastically, and he addressed Sherlock with a serious expression. "Stop." Hearing Tony's words, Sherlock slammed on the brakes. Once the car stopped, Tony, without hesitation, got out and closed his suit. Sherlock was still unsure what was happening. Tony left a message saying he needed to find pepper pots for something, and told Sherlock to go ahead and he'd catch up. Before Tony left, Sherlock noticed the entry above Tony's head had changed. Entry: Rubber Life. Entry effect: enlarges a certain body part every 30 minutes, changing every 30 minutes, at a random location. Entry time: 23 hours, 59 minutes, and 1 second. As if understanding something, Sherlock slapped the steering wheel with jealousy, then guiltily picked up his phone and called his future aunt, Pepper Potts. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelis. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 28: What I Saw Along the Way. Who knows what Sherlock and Pepper said that day? Tony hadn't returned since leaving. After waiting all day, Sherlock drove off without hesitation. Without Tony, Sherlock finally experienced the true joy of time travel. Sherlock finally understood why the Ford Raptor is considered the ultimate time travel treasure. Powered by the powerful American V8, this car can literally take you anywhere, regardless of road or terrain, as long as you give it the gas. Beyond the thrill of driving, Sherlock also experienced the joys of the wealthy. It's no wonder that before time travel, so many wealthy people were obsessed with time travel and raptors. Once this thing gets going, it's pure joy, especially for men. The feeling is simply irresistible. Imagine driving a raptor across the vast expanse of the Gobi Desert, flooring the accelerator. The powerful damping and power make it feel like it's on the open road. The rising dust was left behind before it even had a chance to settle on the car. From a distance, it even gave Sherlock the feeling of a lone rider charging into battle. What male creature could resist such a temptation? Especially one like humans, who, after thousands of years of cold weaponry, have the battlefield charge practically etched into their DNA. Sherlock couldn't resist a feeling, even becoming addicted. Forget magic, not even the technologically advanced Iron Man suit could give Sherlock the same feeling. Furthermore, thanks to the vastness and sparse population of the lighthouse country, he didn't have to worry about pedestrians or other vehicles. The feeling of just accelerator and no brakes was even more addictive. Beyond this joyful feeling, Sherlock was captivated by the scenery along the way. While it certainly wasn't as breathtaking as the legendary Ducal Highway, which traversed all 4 seasons in his previous life, nor the magnificent Sichuan-Tibet Highway, thanks to the sparse population and the abundance of uninhabited areas, the journey through forests, peaks, deserts, and neighboring mountains allowed Sherlock to fully indulge his passion for road tripping. Sherlock even concluded that for camping, the forest was the absolute top choice. The fresh air and readily available materials were truly captivating. Waking up the next morning to the light mist and the refreshing smell of earth was truly captivating. For the thrill of time travel, the next door was the perfect choice. The vast expanse of plains, the trail of dust behind you, and even with the car windows open, it was incredibly exciting. As for the desert, it was all about the sheer exhilaration of climbing over sand dunes. Sherlock preferred the feeling of the forest and Gobi Desert to the desert. Besides the beautiful scenery, the people he met along the way also left a deep impression on him. In particular, the people of Florida, a jutting outcrop from the great lighthouse country, truly lived up to the saying Sherlock had read before crossing over. In Florida, you can be broke, but you can't be broke. That guy. The people and things Sherlock witnessed along the way were so imaginative and bizarre that Sherlock didn't even dare to elaborate. Any attempt to describe them would either result in a 404 error or simply seem unnatural. Breaking into a house in the middle of the night to give a kitten a Mediterranean haircut, or enchanting his hands with peanut butter to pick a fight with a neighbor with a peanut allergy seemed trivial now that Sherlock understood the local customs. Even some criminals were bizarre. Sherlock once witnessed a man strip down to his underwear before robbing a convenience store and calling the police. When the police arrived, he simply lay on the ground and waited for them to arrest him. Curious, Sherlock couldn't understand why this man would strip down to his clothes before robbing someone, so he used a confusion charm to pose as a reporter and interview him. The man's excuse was compelling: the JY provided food and lodging, and he didn't want to work, he wanted to get a taste of government service. As for taking off his clothes and robbing a convenience store, it was simply to prove he was unarmed. Sherlock listened to the man's story with the demeanor of a subway wretch, then decisively left and boarded his car. Who knew if he'd become a bit of a freak if he hung around any longer? Adhering to the principle of taking precautions, Sherlock didn't hesitate. Besides Florida, with its simple folkways, Sherlock's second most impressive state was Texas, also known as the Lone Star Republic. If Florida is simple, then Texas is wild. Those guys, if anything goes wrong, will literally pull out their guns and start a fight, especially in rural areas. Of course, despite their wildness, Sherlock still enjoyed the rich cowboy culture. After all, the American TV series Yellowstone had left a lasting impression on him. Speaking of the lighthouse state, the cowboy is its most famous cultural symbol. Cowboy culture flourished across Texas, and the various rodeos were truly eye-opening for Sherlock. The cowboys' American IAI skills alone were enough to astound Sherlock. Hell, 2 shots fired in fractions of a second, both hitting their targets, even the sound of a single shot. To Sherlock, it was practically magic. And then there was that magical lasso. Sherlock spent ages learning how to swing it at a rally, but he still couldn't quite figure it out. Everyone else swung it in a circle, but when it came to Sherlock, he swung it with a single stick. This earned Sherlock the constant ridicule of the older cowboys, though they meant no harm, and even treated him to a drink at the end. Of course, there are strengths and weaknesses, and Sherlock's rapid-fire rifle skills impressed the older cowboys. After all, such speed and accuracy demonstrated Sherlock's extensive training, and cowboys never mocked hard work. Beyond all that, the most unsettling thing about Sherlock was the wild cowgirls. Sherlock was truly unskilled in handling these wild women, and each time he could only flee with a blushing face amidst the laughter of the crowd. Texas was the place where Sherlock had spent the longest time so far on this journey. Next, Sherlock had planned to travel from Mexico to Yellowstone National Park in Ohio, then drive all the way to Hollywood on the West Coast before returning home to conclude this long journey. Chapter 29: The Hammer Falls from the Sky. In the New Mexico desert, Sherlock blasted raucous rock music, howling as he drove with the windows down, savoring the thrill of full throttle. This feeling captivated Sherlock, so much so that he almost forgot he even knew magic. He sped along, avoiding small towns wherever possible. Unless he was running low on supplies, Sherlock wouldn't take the road. Having just refueled in a nearby town and stocked up on gas and food, Sherlock was now in a state of rage. To reach Bygone Park as quickly as possible, Sherlock unleashed his raptor-like fury. As the car accelerated, Sherlock's excitement grew, and the rock music in the car grew increasingly frantic. Unbeknownst to Sherlock, far away in the universe, Asgard was undergoing a transformation. Their prince, Thor, had been stripped of his powers by the god King Odin. He even threatened to exile Thor to Earth. Thor, now standing before the throne, argued with his father. However, it was clear that the god King Odin had no intention of arguing with Thor. With a simple gesture, Mjolnir, nicknamed Meowhammer, flew into Odin's hand. After issuing a magical ban on Meowhammer, Odin simply tossed it towards the Rainbow Bridge, and before Heimdall could even react, Meowhammer had already soared into the Rainbow Bridge. Meanwhile, Sherlock, on Earth, naturally failed to notice Meowhammer, fresh from the Rainbow Bridge, midair. He continued to charge with the accelerator firmly planted, joyfully charging forward like a god. As Sherlock's Meowhammer and his charge continued, the distance between them grew closer and closer, until, in a split second, Meowhammer and Sherlock's raptor's rear end made close contact. Thanks to Meowhammer's unique properties, Sherlock's raptor's immense inertia was unable to destabilize it, but this very property also caused Sherlock's raptor to suffer. For a split second, the Meowhammer landed right on the rear wheel beam just as it smashed through the raptor's tailgate. The combined force of the raptor's forward momentum and the relatively stationary Meowhammer tore Sherlock's pickup truck's tailgate apart. Even with the immense momentum, the Meowhammer tore through Sherlock's beloved car and threw it over his shoulder. Fortunately, Sherlock's reaction was quick. The moment the Meowhammer struck the tailgate, he subconsciously cast a wandless, silent spell to shield himself. Combined with the vehicle's airbags, he sustained no damage. Even so, the impact was enough to stun Sherlock for a long time. After a long pause, Sherlock slowly climbed out of the cab. At a single glance, Sherlock felt his blood pressure rise. The reason was simple: his beloved car, the raptor that had carried him across half of America, was practically shattered. Aside from the relatively intact cab, the ground was littered with the shattered remains of Sherlock's beloved car. Even the shards of the tent, which Sherlock had painstakingly built over several nights, could be vaguely seen. Instantly, Sherlock was in a frenzy, determined to see what could have destroyed his beloved car like this. Damn it, what vendetta could have caused someone to use a missile against a simple civilian like him? As an LSP, Sherlock had even turned down those wild cowgirls who approached him, so how could he possibly provoke such a ruthless individual? Fortunately, the missile didn't explode. If it had, he'd be in for more than just a bit of a daze. Cursing and stumbling, Sherlock reached the impact point, only to be stunned. What appeared before his eyes wasn't a missile, as he'd initially assumed, but a hammer he knew incredibly well. What the hell? Meowhammer? Has the fucking Thor storyline begun? So, it was that old, rascally god King Odin who smashed my car. As if confirming something, Sherlock looked up at the empty sky, raised his hands, and made the universal hand gesture. Exclamation mark, @ and, and, Heimdall, I know you can see and hear. Tell that old rascal Odin, my @ is mother, and, and, and. Don't pretend you can't see. I know you can see. My %, his mother's, and, and. Heimdall stood at the entrance to the Rainbow Bridge, watching Sherlock telegraph for nearly half an hour. Crucially, not a single sentence was repeated during that half an hour. The content was so obscene and blatant that Sherlock had practically exhausted all the women in Asgard. After a while, Sherlock finally stopped sending the telegram. Far away in the god's realm, Heimdall couldn't help but wipe the sweat from his forehead. He silently sighed. This kid can really rant. As for Sherlock's suggestion to relay these words to God King Odin, Heimdall thought about it and decided against it. Regardless of whether he could remember Sherlock's entire message, even if he did, Heimdall felt there was no need to tell Odin. If he did, the old man would probably be so angry he couldn't sleep. Not only would he lose sleep, He might even have to take his prized weapon to Earth and fight this young man in a duel. It wouldn't be worth it. Well, it certainly wasn't, because he was afraid of God King Odin finding out and taking his wrath out on him. Putting Heimdall aside, Sherlock was truly tired of scolding. After all, he'd been swearing for a long time, but there had been no response from the higher-ups, which only meant that they didn't seem to be paying attention. Gradually calming down, Sherlock glanced at the Meowth hammer, nestled in the center of the ruins. Sherlock remembered it vividly. Ever since it appeared in the movie, the merchandise had been selling like hotcakes. Sherlock had even bought one. Now that he'd found the real thing, he was determined to try it. Arriving next to the Meowth hammer, Sherlock took a horse stance, gripping the handle with both hands. He took a deep breath, channeling his ki into his dantian, and then, with a burst of force, he exerted his strength. Well, Sherlock farted. As for the Meowth hammer, it remained motionless. Sherlock wasn't surprised at all. Just based on the half-hour he'd spent as a Spitfire, the Meowth hammer wouldn't have acknowledged him. Sherlock did have some self-awareness. Even though he knew the Meowth hammer wouldn't acknowledge him, Sherlock felt playful and pulled out his wand to try the levitation charm. To Sherlock's surprise, it actually worked. Sherlock's spell successfully made Meowhammer float. If Meowhammer was conscious, even Meowhammer itself would be a little confused. But Sherlock was not surprised at all. After all, according to Ancient One, one's magic means that one's will is above the rules. Sherlock was not surprised at all that Meowhammer could float. After decisively taking out his mobile phone and letting Meowhammer float in his hand and taking a few photos, Sherlock carefully controlled Meowhammer to return to its original landing point, without even changing the posture. After some confirmation, Sherlock nodded with satisfaction and picked up the phone. Hello? Insurance? I want to file an insurance claim. You may not believe it, but my car was smashed into pieces by a hammer that fell from the sky. Chapter 30, Coulson Takes Action, Part 1. Sherlock spent nearly half an hour explaining to the insurance company that he wasn't playing a joke on him, but that a hammer had actually fallen from the sky and smashed his raptor to pieces. But the operator refused to believe him, initially believing Sherlock was a young man who had stolen his parents' phone as a prank. A hammer falling from the sky? He'd have believed it if it had been a misfiring missile from a BD experiment. He'd even have believed Sherlock if he'd said it was Iron Man who had fallen and damaged his car. A hammer? Haha, if I believed that, I'd be a real hammer. This was the operator's deepest, most sincere thought. Sherlock persuaded the operator, and after a long haggling, he finally agreed to come and take a look. After all, whether it was a smash or Sherlock's deliberate destruction, as an insurance company, Sherlock had to report the claim and confirm it wasn't fraud. Sherlock finally breathed a sigh of relief when the man on the other end of the line, while still unconvinced by what he'd just experienced, agreed to send an investigator to investigate. He quickly reported his location, even donning his helmet for accuracy, and using Jarvis to locate his longitude and latitude, before finally hanging up the phone with satisfaction. The rest was a tedious wait. As long as the insurance company arrived and saw his now shattered car, Sherlock would definitely get the insurance. Although he felt a little reluctant to part with his car, the thought of being able to trade it in for a newer Raptor made Sherlock feel it was worth it, and he even felt a little happy. As for the wait, Sherlock said it wouldn't be boring. He still had the Meowth hammer to keep him company. Although he couldn't lift the authentic Meowth hammer, that didn't stop him from experimenting with his magic on it. After some manipulation, Sherlock was surprised to discover that not all of his magic was compatible with Meowth hammer. Conceptual spells like levitate and cleanse proved impervious to even Meowth hammer. However, when it came to physical spells like blazing flames and slicing, Meowth hammer was completely immune, even though Sherlock had minimized the range and power of his spells to preserve the scene. After all, the insurance investigators in the Lighthouse country were comparable to Ferber, refusing to pay any claim if they saw even the slightest sign of error. Sherlock didn't want to let his latest raptor die just because he was bored. Of course, Sherlock didn't have the guts to test more powerful dark magic on Meowth hammer. After all, there was only one of them, and according to the plot, Thor needed Meowth hammer to regain his divine power and restore his true nature as the hammer god. Sherlock couldn't guarantee that if Meowth hammer was truly destroyed by his dark magic, would Thor, still the hammer god, be able to defeat the destroyer sent by Loki as he did in the original story. Aside from these two types of magic, Sherlock also gained something. His biggest reward was a new replica of the Meowth hammer, created using the technique of double duplication. While this replica was merely a high-quality imitation of the Meowth hammer's appearance, and Sherlock carefully touched it and even found the feel to be off, Sherlock was still quite satisfied with it as a collectible. Beyond this collectible, Sherlock's greatest surprise was the Meowth hammer's inability to resist his transfiguration spell. While it would transform into whatever Sherlock desired, its transformation duration was significantly shorter than other objects. Furthermore, for unknown reasons, the Meowth hammer couldn't transform into living things. Every time Sherlock tried to transform it into a real Meowth hammer, he failed. Furthermore, Sherlock discovered that even though the Meowth hammer's appearance was altered by transfiguration, some of its properties remained, just as Sherlock was unable to lift the feathered Meowth hammer. Despite this, Sherlock felt quite satisfied. Imagine, during a battle with Thor, Sherlock suddenly transformed Thor's Meowth hammer into a small red flower. Though the flower looked incredibly fragile, as if it would break at any second, in Thor's hands it was just as powerful as the real Meowth hammer, unleashing a powerful force upon any enemy. To his own side, it was merely amusing, but to his enemies, it was incredibly damaging and even more insulting. If Thor truly transformed Sherlock, Meowth hammer would retain its original attack power while also inflicting 100% mental damage, comparable to the torment of being sunk by the mantis shrimp, as depicted in the jokes shared by netizens before his time travel. After experimenting with his magic, Sherlock lay bored on the ground, sunbathing, and imagining Thor wreaking havoc in New York, clutching a small red flower. The mere thought of it was so beautiful, even a little bit jarring. Just as Sherlock felt himself drifting off to sleep in the warm sun, he heard the faint roar of an engine. After double-checking that he had heard correctly, Sherlock lamented his lost nap, sat up, and looked in the direction of the figure. A small-looking vehicle appeared not far from the horizon. Its cream-colored body looked unusually miniature, and its engine roared continuously. After observing it for a moment, Sherlock confirmed that it was a Beetle, a model that could be considered a vintage car. It was probably the insurance he had called earlier. The Beetle wasn't moving very fast, and after a long wait, it finally arrived in front of Sherlock, swaying to a stop. From the Beetle's small cabin, a large, chubby man, comparable to Happy, emerged. Sherlock was even afraid that when the man emerged, the Beetle would collapse. After a while, the portly man, wiping the sweat from his forehead, came over to Sherlock and held out his chubby hand. "Hello, I'm your insurance investigator, Frankie Burke. This is my business card. I heard your car was damaged by a hammer." Sherlock took the card and pointed at the scene behind him. Frankie Burke finally looked over, and at the first glance, the corners of his mouth twitched wildly. Damn, he had thought Sherlock was just joking, but he never expected the outrageousness to be real. Even more outrageous, Frankie Burke couldn't get the Meow hammer off the ground after a long time of experimenting. This situation made Frankie Burke feel really outrageous. It was outrageous to the extreme. Chapter 31 Kelson Takes Action, Part 2. Just as Frankie Burke was beginning to doubt his years of experience as an insurance investigator due to the hammer he couldn't lift, practically impossible, a convoy of Cadillac Escalades appeared on the horizon. The dust rising from the full-size SUVs quickly caught Sherlock and Frankie Burke's attention. In a matter of moments, the convoy arrived near Sherlock and parked neatly not far from the wreckage of his vehicle. A group of men in black suits emerged from the vehicles and began to patrol the area. Frankie Burke didn't understand what was happening, but Sherlock knew who they were. The reason was simple: Sherlock spotted an old acquaintance among them, Agent Kelson, the mayor of the Novus village, known for his troubled hairline. Kelson seemed to have noticed Sherlock as well, and smiled as he stepped forward to greet her. "Hello again, Sherlock. We've met a few times. You should know Phil Kelson." Unlike Frankie Burke, who broke out in a cold sweat at the spectacle, Sherlock remained much calmer, extending his hand and shaking Kelson's. "Of course, Agent Kelson. Uncle Tony's return is thanks to your help. By the way, how did you end up here?" Kelson's smile remained unchanged despite Sherlock's question, and he actually answered. "We detected a powerful energy surge near this area. While investigating, I received a message from headquarters saying you were nearby, and your car had been damaged by a hammer that fell from the sky, so we came to take a look." Although Sherlock had anticipated Kelson's explanation, he still narrowed his eyes slightly, seeming a little unhappy as he asked back, "Are you spying on me?" Seeing that Sherlock didn't seem very happy, Callison quickly explained. "No, Mr. Sherlock, you misunderstood us. We're not monitoring your daily activities, only reporting special circumstances. You know, ever since Tony's last dangerous encounter, everyone around him has been on our priority list. Don't overthink it, Mr. Sherlock, it's simply a precaution. After all, the incident with your uncle last time was truly catastrophic." Of course, Sherlock didn't believe a word of Callison's explanation. Blackeg's skeptical nature, combined with Hydra, made SHIELD a company with a very low standard. Sherlock wouldn't believe they were simply taking precautionary measures. It was more likely that Tony hadn't found out the identity of the sorcerer who battled Ironmonger that night, and that's why they started monitoring Tony's surroundings. Fortunately, Sherlock and Tony rarely discussed Sherlock's vest on the phone, leaving the SHIELD team helpless. She nodded expressionlessly at Callison and said nothing more. Seeing that Sherlock didn't seem interested in dealing with him anymore, Callison turned to Frankie Burke, who had been standing nearby. "Mr. Frankie Burke, I'm sorry, but you can't share the photos from the scene with anyone. We need you to sign a non-disclosure agreement. This matter is classified as confidential." Callison's words successfully infuriated Frankie Burke again. The chubby Frankie Burke stared at Callison like a mad boar. "I'm sorry, sir, but which department are you from? I don't think I can follow your instructions. My employer, Mr. Sherlock, has suffered property damage, and I need photos from the scene to help him with his insurance claim." Frankie Burke, a seasoned veteran, had encountered this kind of situation more than once. He'd even encountered employers hiring actors to impersonate relevant individuals to defraud insurance. Such situations were not uncommon in the Lighthouse country. After all, both Forbo and the Langley gang wielded immense power over certain matters. Callison wasn't surprised by Frankie Burke's statement. He smiled as he showed him his ID. "Mr. Frankie Burke, here are my IDs from the insurance company. We'll provide you with a statement so you can use them to arrange insurance for Mr. Sherlock." Seeing Callison's seemingly confident attitude, Frankie Burke hesitated. He took Callison's IDs, glanced at Sherlock, who remained expressionless, and continued. "Okay, I'll need to contact headquarters to verify the authenticity of the IDs. If what you say is true, Mr. Sherlock will still receive the compensation he deserves." With that, Frankie Burke ignored Sherlock and Callison and went off to the side, making numerous phone calls. Sherlock and Callison glanced at him and then stopped paying attention. Instead, Callison observed the scene with intense interest and exclaimed to Sherlock. "Mr. Sherlock, judging by the traces at the scene, your accident was incredibly tragic. You're incredibly lucky to be uninjured despite such a horrific scene." Cheyenne Callison's sigh made Sherlock panic for a moment, but soon, a bold idea formed in his mind, and he began to lose control. "No, my dear Agent Callison, the reason I wasn't injured is because I have some special medicines for special situations. The effects of these medicines vary, but they are all extremely effective. In fact, as long as there is still a breath left, with enough medicine, you can be saved. It is precisely because of these medicines that I am still alive, although the side effects are a bit strange." Sherlock's words successfully caught Callison's attention. The two foxes were thinking at different times, and Callison looked at Sherlock with feigned surprise. "Really? Mr. Sherlock, can you show me these potions? Your information doesn't say you can make such potions." In response to Callison's question, Sherlock must have thought of a solution since he had been so bold. He naturally took out a bottle of white moss potion and handed it to Callison. "Of course, Mr. Callison, this is one of the potions I made. It can quickly heal external injuries and won't even leave scars. As for why I made these potions, all I can tell you is that I saw them in a very old book. To be honest, I didn't believe it at first, but because of an accident, I had to believe it was real. Oh, and remember, the side effects of this thing are completely random. The same potion will have different side effects for everyone. Even after the side effects were off, the side effects will be different when using the same potion again." Chapter 32 Sherlock's New Identity. Callison was skeptical of Sherlock's words, but the fact that Sherlock didn't show any injuries at the moment was strong evidence. Thinking of this, Callison took the potion from Sherlock with a smile. Seeing Callison accept the potion, Sherlock's smile widened even more. "Agent Callison, this is a gift. Your Department of Homeland Security, Logistics, or whatever, let's just call it SHIELD, can't buy it. You can contact me, but production is limited, so I can't sell too much. and I only accept gold." Seeing Sherlock's businessman-like demeanor, Callison's eyes shifted, his gentle smile still on his face. "Of course, Mr. Sherlock, do you mind if we try it out on the spot?" Sherlock, unfazed by Callison's words, gestured to Callison, and without hesitation, Callison called an SHIELD agent over. Sherlock took a closer look. A familiar face. The legendary Crossbones Brock Rumlow. He was a formidable figure in the comics, but a minor character in the film. But one thing was clear, he looked incredibly manly. After Callison explained the effects of Sherlock's potion to Rumlow, he, a ruthless man, unleashed his dagger without hesitation and slashed his arm. Such brutality made Sherlock's brows quiver, and even Callison looked surprised. Rumlow, clearly noticing their expressions, smiled at them before speaking. "Don't be surprised. As field agents constantly facing danger, Mr. Sherlock's potion is a lifesaver. I was just overly excited. By the way, Mr. Sherlock, how should it be used?" Sherlock's lips twitched at Rumlow's explanation, secretly admiring the ruthless Hydra figure who dared to confront the captain. But outwardly, he remained composed as he spoke to Rumlow. "It's simple, Mr. Ruthless, just pour a little bit of the potion directly onto the wound. By the way, this potion has side effects. While it won't harm you, the side effects, well, how should I put it? They're a bit strange, and they're different every time I use them." Rumlow clearly didn't care about Sherlock's words. He simply opened the bottle and poured the potion onto the wound. Seeing Rumlow not even frown the entire time, Sherlock looked at Callison beside him, his eyelids twitching. "Are all you SHIELD people so ruthless? Don't look at me. This is the first time I've heard of such a ruthless guy." The two exchanged a quick glance before turning their attention to Rumlow, who was testing the potion. As the potion came into contact with Rumlow's wound, a small bubble quickly formed. Instantly, the wound Rumlow had inflicted himself vanished without a trace under the potion's effects. But the side effects soon became apparent. Rumlow's expression became incredibly strange, and he seemed to be looking at Sherlock thoughtfully. Sherlock, feeling somewhat uneasy at Rumlow's gaze, finally glanced above him, where Rumlow's current state also appeared. Entry, Unfallen Banner, cursed by the world, forcing the effect to occur. Indelible, entry effect, brick throwing power. As long as you ignore certain things, it's a man's dream and a woman's nightmare. Time limit, 24 hours, 59 minutes, and 26 seconds. The moment Sherlock saw this entry, he understood why Rumlow was looking at him so strangely. He could only smile awkwardly before answering. "Well, the effects are random, not what you think. According to records, some people have even experienced the ability to control lightning as a side effect after using the potion." Rumlow rolled his eyes at Sherlock's words, tossed the potion to Callison, and then left with an extremely strange gesture. Watching Rumlow walk away, Sherlock finally remembered to call after him. "By the way, Mr. Ruthless, the side effects last for 24 hours. Rumlow nearly stumbled after hearing Sherlock's words. He turned back and glared at Sherlock before turning and walking away. As a level 7 SHIELD agent, Callison's observation skills were undoubtedly impressive, and he'd naturally noticed Rumlow's abnormality. Looking at the potion in his hand, even Callison couldn't help but twitch his lips. "Sherlock, are you saying that the effects last for a full 24 hours? Sherlock could only nod helplessly at Callison's question and repeat himself. "Indeed, the side effects last for 24 hours, and the effects are completely random. According to ancient texts, some people experience side effects comparable to superpowers, while others, like that ruthless man, experience no pain or discomfort." At Sherlock's words, Callison's expression grew serious, and he looked at Sherlock intently. "Excuse me, who have you sold this potion to?" Although Callison's words were interrogative, neither his expression nor his tone suggested a question. Instead, it sounded more like a confirmation. Sherlock showed no sign of panic. Since he'd decided to use a pseudonym, he'd naturally already planned a solution. After a moment's thought, he answered Callison's question directly. "No one. Besides myself, I've only sold it to two people. One is my Uncle Tony, who needed the antidote. The other is someone I don't know. He wears a black hood, obscuring his face, and possesses some mysterious abilities. I don't know how he knew I had this potion, but he came straight to me and bought a large quantity. Luckily, he's a decent guy and gave me quite a bit of gold." As Sherlock finished, Callison's face visibly brightened with surprise. Just as Callison was about to say something more, Frankie Burke, who had been making countless phone calls, approached. He handed Callison his ID and spoke. "Agent Callison, I verified your identity, and headquarters has agreed to your request. I'll sign a confidentiality agreement shortly, and I'd also appreciate a statement from you for our records." Frankie Burke then turned to Sherlock and continued. "Mr. Sherlock, based on the terms of your insurance policy, we can offer you 2 compensation packages. You can choose one. The first is a payment equal to the value of your vehicle, enough for a new Raptor. The second is a new Raptor will purchase and deliver to a nearby town. You can continue your journey, and we won't charge you a service fee. However, you must renew your insurance with us. Which one would you choose?" Following Frankie Burke's words, Sherlock chose the second option without hesitation. He wasn't in a rush anyway. Since he'd caught up with Thor's plot, he didn't want to see this idiotic Thor in person. Callison stood aside and watched Sherlock and Frankie Burke's conversation. It was obvious that he had nothing to say, so Callison temporarily gave up asking Sherlock about a mysterious magician. After the 3 of them signed several agreements and contracts, Frankie Burke drove away in his beat-up Beetle. It was not until Frankie Burke disappeared from Sherlock's sight that Sherlock remembered that he seemed to have no car. He could only look at Callison beside him awkwardly and said, Agent Callison, do you mind giving me a ride to the nearby town?" Callison had no reason to refuse Sherlock's request. He immediately asked Rumlow, who had been sitting in the car due to the side effects of the potion, to take Sherlock away. After seeing Rumlow driving Sherlock out of sight, Callison picked up the phone and made a call. "Director, there's a new situation." Chapter 33 Conversation in the car. I woke up and saw that the chapter had been censored again. I'm so impressed. This is the revised version. Everyone, take a look. Sherlock, already in the car, had no idea that Callison had already reported the potion to Black Egg, but even if he knew, Sherlock probably wouldn't care. The fact that he was able to catch up with Thor on this trip was purely accidental, and revealing his special talents was a sudden inspiration. After all, not long ago, his wizard disguise had rescued Pepper Potts and replaced Iron Man in the fight against Ironmonger. Crucially, Tony didn't even try to stop him when he killed Ironmonger. To say that his disguise had nothing to do with Tony was simply impossible. S.H.I.E.L.D. would undoubtedly want to uncover his true identity beneath the disguise, but unfortunately, his disguise was flawless. Aside from his height and weight, finding any evidence was simply impossible. He tried to find clues from Tony's side, but Tony cleverly fooled him. Sherlock figured if he were S.H.I.E.L.D., they would also first suspect those close to Tony, with him being the prime suspect. Originally, this wasn't a big deal, but Sherlock hadn't anticipated that while simply traveling, he'd stumble upon a Thor plotline, and his phone was being tapped by S.H.I.E.L.D. Ultimately, S.H.I.E.L.D. and the security team were both in place, and the original redneck truck battle with Meowth Hammer had vanished without a trace. After much deliberation, Sherlock decided to expose the potion to S.H.I.E.L.D., using the Thor plot to completely separate the 2 accounts and give S.H.I.E.L.D. a headache. At least until Captain America could break Hydra out of S.H.I.E.L.D., he had to keep his cover tight from S.H.I.E.L.D. Sherlock sat in the spacious, modified backseat of the Yellow Emperor's Cup, gazing out the window and refining his plan in his mind. Crossbones Rumlow, the driver, occasionally glanced at Sherlock through the rearview mirror with an odd expression. Sherlock naturally noticed Rumlow's expression, which was partly strange, partly anxious, partly expectant, and partly conflicted, a pie-shaped expression. However, the Hydra operative didn't ask him questions, and Sherlock didn't bother to explain. He continued to stare out the window, his mind reeling over Thor's plot. Honestly, as a fun-loving person, Sherlock felt that since he had already encountered Thor's plot, it would be a blasphemy not to go and see the excitement. This was also why he chose to wait for his new car in the small town. If all went well, his car would arrive just in time for Thor's battle with the Destroyer. With a little luck, he might even be able to visit Asgard. And since we're talking about the Destroyer, we have to mention Sherlock's thoughts. Although Sherlock also likes the Meow Hammer, it's a misfortune that Sherlock and him are not meant to be. No matter how much he likes it, Sherlock can't possess it. Moreover, compared to the Meow Hammer, Odin's Destroyer armor is still more appealing to Sherlock. Sherlock suspects that the Destroyer armor, in addition to being capable of single-handed combat, is likely a suit with both amplification and protection properties. After all, Sherlock had heard before his time travel that Odin, a godlike figure, could rival even one of the Celestials in the Destroyer armor. And most importantly, this thing might be made of the same material as the Meow Hammer. Sherlock has been coveting that armor for a long time. With its protection. If, as Sherlock suspects, the Destroyer armor is made of the same Euro metal as the Meow Hammer, then its protection and magical conductivity are both maxed out. Compared to these, Tony's Iron Man armor is a mere child. But the most crucial question was how to acquire the Destroyer armor. After all, Sherlock wasn't capable of crushing hammers with his bare hands, so naturally, he hadn't figured out how to acquire the Destroyer armor with its full protection. Sherlock even felt that even if he had to settle for a few fragments, he could use some Harry Potter-inspired alchemy to practice his favorite weapon. But how to obtain the fragments was still a problem. Did he have to use Hela's nails, the Eurometal noble phantasm? Damn it. The more Sherlock thought about it, the more difficult it seemed. After much deliberation, Sherlock made a decision that defied his ancestry. He decided to try using the side effects of the potion. If he was lucky and got a useful ability, then Sherlock wouldn't mind intervening in Thor's storyline. If not, Sherlock would just assume he had no connection to this thing. Just thinking about the ridiculous weight-bearing effects of his potion made his teeth ache. Rumlow, sitting in the driver's seat, watched Sherlock, whose expression began to shift in the back seat, and his lips twitched. He then spoke. Mr. Sherlock, if you want to laugh, go ahead. Honestly, your medicine is effective, but I didn't expect this side effect. Hearing Rumlow's words, Sherlock finally snapped out of his chaotic thoughts and looked at Rumlow in surprise. After a moment's pause, Sherlock realized that Rumlow had misunderstood him. He quickly replied. You misunderstood, Mr. Agent. I was just thinking about something. It's not about you. Rumlow, who hadn't yet revealed his Hydra identity, was easy to talk to. He smiled slightly before continuing Sherlock's words. Rumlow, Brock Rumlow, just call me Rumlow. Rumlow paused after introducing himself, glancing down at his crotch before continuing with a troubled expression. Mr. Sherlock, I'd like to ask, are the side effects of this thing truly unavoidable? Such a useful potion, and yet this side effect. Seeing the troubled expression on Brock Crossbones Hydra Rumlow's face, Sherlock's eyes shifted, and he immediately began his deceptive tactics. I'm sorry, Mr. Rumlow, this side effect is unavoidable. You should know that everything has a price, especially a potent potion like this. Compared to the damage to my body, this minor side effect is nothing. Sherlock paused before continuing. And according to that ancient book I read before, these so-called side effects are incredibly varied. With a little luck, you can even gain 24 hours of divine power. If you're unlucky, well, you already know. Chapter 34 Life in the Magical Salted Fish Town, Part 1. In the car, Sherlock had effectively tricked Rumlow. Since there were no recording devices in the S.H.I.E.L.D. vehicle, Sherlock didn't believe a word of it. He was speaking to both Hydra and Black Egg. Sherlock only intended to sell 3 potions to S.H.I.E.L.D., White Moss Potion for external injuries, Antidote for poison removal, and Polyjuice Potion for transfiguration. Of these, Polyjuice Potion was the least in quantity, so much so that Sherlock could count on one hand. While not as rare as Polyjuice Potion, the other 2 potions weren't in great demand either. Scarcity, after all, made things valuable. This would also make it easier for Sherlock to extort a substantial sum from S.H.I.E.L.D. Furthermore, the uncertainties regarding the potential side effects, whether heroic or even devastating, would effectively dissuade Hydra, who were currently playing it safe. As for Black Egg, Sherlock remained confident that Black Egg was definitely interested in his potion, and might even oppose it. The appearance of Thor was the catalyst for this incident. The mysterious gods, coupled with the eerie wizard within Sherlock's disguise, made Black Egg worry excessively about whether Sherlock's potions would actually exhibit godlike side effects. Furthermore, putting aside other considerations, the potion's effects alone were enough to make Black Egg care about him after experiencing Thor's training. Only then could Sherlock maintain his pharmacist persona. Back to the present, Rumlow, nearly crippled by Sherlock's deception, dropped Sherlock off at the edge of town and eagerly began driving back. As an outsourced worker, his head ached from Sherlock's sleight of hand, one false deception tactics, inherited from Uncle Benton's Spring Festival Gala performance. While in the car, Rumlow even regretted not having studied enough in his youth. Watching Rumlow vanish in a flash, Sherlock couldn't help but curl his lips as he stood on the outskirts of town. He hadn't even begun to inquire about Rumlow's family situation, yet why was he so eager to run off? His fighting power was far inferior to the village women of his previous life. As Rumlow vanished into the distance in his yellow emperor, Sherlock stopped dwelling on SHIELD and leisurely walked back into town. The town was a classic western, a typical redneck town. It wasn't very large, but it had everything it needed. All the necessary amenities were readily available, and Sherlock was delighted with the amenities. He strolled to a hotel and checked in. The town wasn't crowded, so the hotel wasn't very large, but it was clean and had a cowboy-style atmosphere. Sherlock was incredibly pleased with his new home. After determining where he'd been staying for the next few days, Sherlock sent his address to the insurance company's rather eccentric on-site investigator, then locked the door and prepared to go out and satisfy his hunger. In this rural setting, the food in small restaurants is mostly meat-based, and most are family-run, not chain-owned. Naturally, the taste is much better than those fast food chains. Sherlock casually ordered a few of the specialties he was looking forward to from the menu, then leisurely watched the TV in the restaurant to while away the time. While Sherlock was lost in thought, watching the TV report about Tony, who was doing good deeds everywhere, his phone unexpectedly rang. Puzzled, he looked at the shit-sized caller ID before slowly answering the call. "My dear nephew, I heard your journey was interrupted by a hammer that fell from the sky? And you were also harassed by those troublesome guys from SHIELD. Just after answering the phone, Tony's gloating figure came through the line. Sherlock rolled his eyes in annoyance and then complained. "My dear uncle, you are very well informed. Can I ask where you heard the news? As for those troublesome guys you mentioned, unfortunately, they might be listening to our conversation right now." Listening to Sherlock's words, Sherlock could feel the other party pause for a moment before Tony's figure came through the receiver. "Monkey fuck. That worthless Nico actually tapped my phone? Jarvis, remember, starting today, my phone is encrypted. I don't want my private life exposed to that guy who talks so much about Marxism-Leninism." Sherlock listened to Tony's foul language for about 5 minutes. Seeing that the dishes he ordered began to arrive one after another, Sherlock looked at the restaurant and saw that there were not many people. He turned down the volume on his phone and turned on the speaker, ready to eat with the sound of Tony's voice. After a while, Tony finally stopped his foul language and whispered to Sherlock, "Are you still there?" Sherlock calmly swallowed the food in his mouth and then slowly answered. "Of course, my dear uncle, your furious expression just now was incredibly appetizing. I even thought the food I just ate tasted a bit more delicious." Hearing Sherlock's words, Tony's defenses were broken once again. After about 5 minutes of arguing with Sherlock, Tony finally declared himself the loser. After some fun, Sherlock finally remembered to get down to business and asked, "Enough of the fun. Let's get down to business. How did you know my car was damaged by a hammer?" That insurance investigator should have signed a confidentiality agreement under the name of Forbo by those guys at SHIELD. Tony, who had initially lost due to his verbal battle, quickly regained his composure after hearing Sherlock's question, and then he answered triumphantly. "It's simple. Because that insurance is one of my industries. Besides, no one can refuse Stark's good-intentioned inquiry." This time it was Sherlock's turn to break down. After using the Marxist theory from his previous life to satirize Tony, the damn capitalist, for nearly 5 minutes, Sherlock was finally satisfied. After Sherlock finally shut up, Tony's voice came from the phone. Okay, let's get down to business. Tell me, is that hammer really as magical as the insurance investigator said? It can't even be lifted." Just as Sherlock was about to say something to dispel the curious Tony, the sound of breaking glass suddenly rang in Sherlock's ears. Before Sherlock could react, a blond burly man had already grabbed Sherlock's shoulders and started shaking him hard. "Are you serious? A hammer that can't be lifted, and it fell from the sky? Tell me, where's that hammer?" If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelis. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 35, Magic Salted Fish's Small Town Life, Part 2. For a moment, Sherlock felt as if his brains were being shaken apart. He couldn't even see who was shaking him, only a faint glimpse of blonde hair. Luckily, the burly man and Sherlock weren't the only ones in the restaurant. Seeing something was amiss, The burly man's companions rushed over at breakneck speed, pulling Sherlock and the burly man apart. Sherlock finally got a clear look at the burly man's face. "Well, how should I put it, Su Jinjiang? It was you." That's right, the one who nearly had Sherlock's brains shaken apart was none other than Mr. Su Jinjiang's half-twin brother, the infamous hammer god Thor. Sherlock had originally planned to wander around town after dinner to see if he could find any trace of Thor, but he never expected Thor to find him on his own. What the hell? A seemingly unsuccessful search? A fully automated, door-to-door version of the hammer god? Sherlock watched Thor, who had been pulled away and stood before him, his expression strangely odd. After being pulled away, Thor had clearly calmed down. He looked at Sherlock's expression, showing no sign of disgust. Instead, he asked with an unusually polite air, "Mortal, do you know me?" Tony, who had clearly heard what was happening on the phone, asked anxiously. "What's wrong, brat? What happened?" Sherlock took a deep breath, his mind racing to process the situation. First, he gave Tony a perfunctory, slap-talking, slap-handed response, like a jerk. Then, despite Tony's foul language, he hung up the phone. Only then did he look up at the two women and the elderly man holding Thor. All three wore apologetic expressions and kept giving Sherlock looks. Although he didn't know them, Sherlock quickly understood their meaning from their eyes. "He's a psychopath. Don't be like him." Sherlock gave the three men a reassuring look before turning to Thor, who was still quite agitated, and replied, "I'm sorry, sir, I don't know you. As for the hammer you want to know, all I can tell you is that it's a short distance east of town." Sherlock's response was neither humble nor arrogant, and his tone didn't even fluctuate much. But Thor, having received the information he sought, was still extremely happy. He completely ignored the expressions of Sherlock and the three people around him, and excitedly patted Sherlock's shoulder. "Very good, mortal, you have successfully earned the friendship of me, Thor, the god of thunder. When I get my hammer back and regain my divine power, I can grant you a request." With that, he turned and strode towards the restaurant's door. The beautiful woman and man behind Thor rolled their eyes in unison, and Sherlock could clearly see the look of WTF on the face of the girl who looked so much like Max from Two Broke Girls. He glanced at the food on the table, where he'd quietly taken a few bites, then at his companions chasing Thor. After a moment's deliberation, he grabbed a donut from the table and stuffed it into his mouth before rushing out. Even Sherlock, who had been mentally prepared, couldn't help but twitch his lips at the dramatic scene before him. In that instant, Sherlock understood exactly why Odin had banished Thor to Earth. He even understood why Loki had usurped the throne. If nothing else, if Thor continued to act like his current, late-stage Chunibyo self, and Asgard truly passed to him, its destruction would likely be imminent. Rubbing his shoulder, which had been sore from Thor's smack, Sherlock silently resolved to exact revenge someday. He shook his head and turned back to finish his unfinished meal. As for Thor's solo foray into SHIELD, Sherlock expressed no particular interest. Thor's frustrated roar barely qualified as a memorable scene, and the rest was just some action. He'd rather return to his hotel and study alchemy in the library, figuring out which potion would most likely produce the desired side effects. As Sherlock ate his meal and pondered his next plan, another swift slap landed on the unprepared Sherlock's back. Caught off guard, Sherlock nearly died. After a long cough, he finally managed to cough up the food that had nearly choked him. Sherlock turned angrily to look at the person who had slapped him. It's that late-stage Chunibyo Thor, the hammer god. Thor, for his part, simply ignored Sherlock's angry glare, continuing his late-stage Chunibyo look and looking at Sherlock with the same Chunibyo demeanor, showing no sign of apology for his actions. "Mortal, there's one more thing. The great Thor needs to know where to get a horse for his journey." Before Sherlock could react, he saw Thor's girlfriend, Jane, outside the restaurant window, yelling and waving to the side. Then, Two Broke Girls Max, the hale and hearty Shavig, and Jane Foster stormed into the restaurant again, choking and carrying Thor out. Even after they'd gotten Thor out, Jane Foster returned to the restaurant, apologized, and paid the bill. Watching the four leave, Sherlock felt a surge of rage. "Very good, Thor, you've successfully incurred the wrath of a wizard." Sherlock gave up on eating and stood up, heading back to his hotel. Damn it, Sherlock hadn't wanted to get involved in Thor's quest for the hammer in the first place. But now, after those two slaps in Thor's face, Sherlock felt it was time to teach Thor a lesson about a villain's revenge from morning till night. Damn it, if I don't show my power, do you think I'm Hello Kitty? If Sherlock doesn't break Thor's defenses, he'll write his name backwards. Quickly gathering his belongings, Sherlock quickly found a deserted alleyway. The Elder Wand appeared in Sherlock's hand in an instant. Not even bothering to disguise himself, Sherlock cast a disillusionment charm on himself. As his body gradually became transparent, the smile on Sherlock's face began to grow increasingly perverse. Chapter 36 Shylock's Revenge. With a crackling sound of spatial distortion, Sherlock vanished into the silent, deserted alley. The next second, with a sullen brow, Sherlock was back in his original position, even in the same place. The reason was simple: Sherlock didn't know Jane Foster's address, and naturally, he didn't know where she had taken Thor, the hammer god. Sherlock's expression was agonizing. After all, he'd experienced a failed apparition attempt. It felt like squeezing through a narrow rubber tube and rapidly advancing. Finally reaching the end, he found it sealed with barbed wire. Either he'd be shattered by the wire and scattered across the landscape, or he'd have to return the way he'd come. Sherlock naturally wouldn't choose to be shattered. That meant returning to his original position. Very well, my dear Thor, our feud has deepened yet another step, Sherlock said fiercely, marking Thor's fate in his mental notebook. Don't ask why it wasn't just a single stroke, Sherlock simply agreed. Although he didn't know where Thor had gone, Sherlock knew where he would eventually appear. After all, Thor couldn't resist the allure of the hammer at the moment, so without hesitation, he apparated away from where he was. When Sherlock reappeared, the scene before him had become the wreckage of his beloved car and the hammer, still standing there, surrounded by a bustling crowd of agents. Fortunately, Sherlock was now invisible, so no SHIELD agent noticed him. Unable to continue standing among the busy agents, Sherlock cautiously moved to the perimeter and began to wait for Thor's arrival. However, Sherlock had clearly miscalculated. He had originally thought that Thor, a reckless man, would not be able to resist the allure of the hammer and would rush here directly after Sherlock explained its location. But Thor clearly didn't do that. Sherlock watched helplessly as the SHIELD agents toiled for an entire afternoon, constructing a makeshift laboratory and enclosing the wreckage of his car and the Meowth hammer within. He watched helplessly as the field operatives, led by Crossbones, happily drove away after completing their work, leaving behind only a few low-level agents armed with pistols as security. Even the weather, initially sunny, gradually turned cloudy. As the sun set, a drizzle began, steadily intensifying. Sherlock's initial desire to teach Thor a lesson about revenge, which lasted from morning till night, shifted to finding an opportunity to inflict a heavy blow. As the sky darkened and the rain intensified, Sherlock could only maintain a small patch of mirror space as a shield and rainproof measure, remaining rooted to the spot. Sherlock simply didn't believe Thor would give up his Meowth hammer so easily. As the rain reached its heaviest, Sherlock faintly heard the roar of a car engine in the distance. Using magic, Sherlock could discern a nervous Jane Foster behind the wheel, and in the passenger seat sat the man Sherlock had been thinking about, Thor. Exclaiming Thor's arrival at last, Sherlock's smile grew ever more perverse. Without hesitation, he pulled his own replica of the Meowth hammer from his library and weighed it in his hand. Feeling the perfect feel, Sherlock cast another disillusionment charm on his hammer before looking toward the SUV nearby. Thor, now dressed in a new outfit, was speaking to nervous Jane Foster. A moment later, Thor closed the car door, leaving Jane Foster alone inside, and strode towards the SHIELD camp. Sherlock naturally followed Thor cautiously, and watched Thor, with his Asgardian prowess, knock down 2 guards before strutting into the center of the lab. That's where Sherlock's beloved car wreck lay, and he saw his beloved Meowth hammer. Thor, beaming with excitement, completely ignored the car wreckage near the hammer. Like a pervert, he gently stroked every part of the hammer, muttering something about his closest comrade. Sherlock got goosebumps from hearing this. It seemed you Asgardians are quite adventurous. After Thor finally finished reminiscing about his past with Meowth hammer, he confidently placed his hand on the hammer's handle, his face already brimming with a look of someone reclaiming their divine power. Sadly, things didn't go as Thor had envisioned. No matter how hard he tried, or even with all his sweet words, he couldn't budge Meowth hammer, or even get it to move. Suddenly, as if struck by a sudden realization, Thor knelt on the ground, his voice aching with agony. That cry was enough to move anyone who heard it to tears and evoke an 800-word essay of profound emotion. But it was clear none of this bothered Sherlock. Seeing Thor already positioned himself, Sherlock no longer hesitated, aiming his hammer at Thor's pained face with a sly grin. With a near-perfect swing of his arm, he struck Thor in the face with a hammer. In the next second, Thor's agonized wail ceased. Under the immense pressure of emotion, coupled with Sherlock's devastating blow, Thor collapsed to the ground, his face covered in blood. Having avenged his vengeance, Sherlock casually tossed his counterfeit Meowth hammer into his library and vanished with a fleeting whimper. As for whether Thor might have suffered a concussion or something, Sherlock wasn't worried at all. First, Sherlock's counterfeit Meow hammer was merely a fake, a facade. Sherlock even suspected it was hollow and likely made of the same aluminum as his own frame. After all, Sherlock had no understanding of Eurometal and hadn't disassembled the hammer to understand its alchemical structure, so it was impossible for him to truly replicate a Meow hammer. Secondly, Sherlock hadn't forgotten that Thor had withstood the force of a planet when forging Stormbreaker. A mere face-to-face hammer was a minor issue for Sherlock. Chapter 37, Thor in the Wizard's Small Town Life, Part 1. After giving Thor a blow to the face, Sherlock, looking relieved, returned to the alley he had left from. It wasn't until he reached his hotel that a sliver of fear hid him. He'd been a little too arrogant, actually doing something like that right under SHIELD's noses. If Black Egg or Hydra ever found out about his magical abilities, they'd definitely be on him like a dog's skin plaster. Unless he gave up everything he had and hide away in a place like Camartage, Black Egg would find ways to coerce or force him into doing something. Sherlock silently repeated his purpose several times. He was here for the destroyer armor, not to cause trouble. He silently opened his senses, checking for anyone watching him. Miraculously, Sherlock sensed no spying, not even a single person monitoring his room. Despite this, Sherlock remained cautious. After casting a confusion charm in his room to make it appear as though he was simply lying in bed reading, he pulled out the pirated Meowth hammer he had just used to strike Thor from his library. As expected, the counterfeit Meowth hammer was already halfway deflated, and the area where it was deflated clearly bore Thor's pained face, like a mask of agony growing on the Meowth hammer. Sherlock rolled around in his bed in delight, wondering if he had finally acquired the ultimate Thor accessory, the one he had personally struck with Thor's Meowth hammer. After a while, Sherlock finally recovered and put the hammer away in his library, intending to keep it forever. He casually pulled out a book on alchemy and lay in bed, intending to read for a while before showering and going to bed. The next day, Sherlock slept until noon before waking up, washing, and leisurely heading to the restaurant for a meal that he wasn't sure if it was breakfast or lunch. Amazingly, Sherlock had barely entered the gate when he spotted Thor and Jane Foster again. This time, Eric Shalvig, the astronomy doctor, was not with him. Only Jane Foster, the big bear girl from Two Broke Girls, and Thor remained, comforting a dejected Thor. The three of them also noticed Sherlock entering. The two girls greeted him with a slightly awkward hello, and Sherlock naturally responded generously. Even Thor himself greeted her, as if he hadn't been the one who had struck Thor with a hammer yesterday. The young people quickly bonded, and only now did Sherlock learn the busty girl from Two Broke Girls' name, Daisy Louise. They had a brief meal together before hastily parting ways. Sherlock didn't mind, finishing his food before getting up to explore the town again. The town wasn't very large, and a short while was enough for Sherlock to get a glimpse of it. This, in turn, meant that there were few entertainment options. Reluctantly, Sherlock entered the town's only bar. Like many typical American bars in the Lighthouse country, it was filled with rednecks drinking. It was quite lively, and Sherlock wasn't shy. Drawing on his recent travels, he was quite popular with the crowd, especially his experiences in Florida. With its ubiquitous sightings of dragons and phoenixes, coupled with its unique landscape, the bar crowd had dubbed a once proud state the American Bull, and they were quite happy with it. Sherlock, naturally, joined in the fun, laughing heartily with his locals, feeling no loneliness at all. As the evening progressed, the lively atmosphere in the bar gradually reached a crescendo. As the townspeople finished their day's work, a steady stream of people streamed into the bustling pub. Sherlock paid no attention, sitting at the bar, sipping his beer and listening to the newcomers' jokes, laughing heartily until a large hand patted Sherlock's shoulder. Puzzled, Sherlock turned and saw the arrivals, Thor, Daisy Louise, and Jane Foster. They had already gotten to know each other well from their morning meal, and now, under the influence of alcohol, their relationship quickly warmed. Thor regaled them with stories about Asgard, and they listened with gusto. After all, a joke is a joke, and as long as it amuses people, that's all that matters. Jane Foster also updated Sherlock on their recent progress. The two women were on vacation, their experimental equipment having been temporarily requisitioned by SHIELD, putting their and the doctor's astronomy research on hold, reduced to paperwork. As for Thor, after experiencing the shock of being unable to lift a Meowth hammer, and with Jane Foster's counseling, he had temporarily relinquished his plans to return to Asgard. He planned to find a job in the small town to support himself first. After all, Thor, an Asgardian warrior, couldn't bear to have to rely on Jane Foster for his livelihood. Upon hearing Thor's job search, Sherlock immediately offered to help him. The three were puzzled, but seeing Sherlock's enthusiasm, they couldn't say anything. They chatted for a long time before drifting off to their respective homes. Sherlock didn't return to the hotel until he used magic to dispel the alcohol in his system. He carefully recalled his interactions with Thor and Jane Foster. He then lamented that Thor simply had a severe case of Chuanyabao, a form of Chuanyabao. After all, in Asgard, where everyone has a Chuanyabao, Sherlock wasn't surprised by Thor's situation. Chuanyabao aside, Sherlock still felt Thor could be a good friend, and even interacted with him more often, finding him occasionally quite interesting. After all, aside from his Chuanyabao, Sherlock discovered that Thor was merely a simpleton and a fun-loving person like himself. In some ways, the two of them were incredibly like-minded. Under Thor's influence, Sherlock even began to become curious about Aski and began to consider finding a way to sneak off to Asgard. But that would have to wait until after he finished his wanderings on Earth. Chapter 38, Thor in the Wizard's Small Town Life, Part 2. Early the next morning, Sherlock's door was violently flung open by the burly Thor. The loud noise jolted Sherlock awake from his dream. Watching Thor calmly enter his room, Sherlock was about to curse when he saw Jane Foster, following behind him, looking apologetic. His rage was temporarily suppressed. Jane Foster awkwardly exchanged a few words with Sherlock before hurriedly giving Thor some instructions and leaving. Only after Jane Foster had left did Thor look at Sherlock, still wrapped in bed, with a hint of apology. "Well, sorry, Jane, something was urgent, and I might have used a little too much force in my haste." Thor's explanation would have been fine, but once he did, Sherlock's anger escalated. "You're so high and mighty, you're so high and mighty, you're so anxious to use my door to pick up girls." Resisting the urge to whip out his wand and give Thor a blast, Sherlock immediately shooed him out. After quickly changing and washing up, Sherlock took Thor to repair the damage to the door before heading off to find a job. Without further hesitation, Sherlock took Thor to the small bar he'd been at the previous night. Seeing the bartender, whom he'd become acquainted with, he approached and asked if he wanted a gigolo. The middle-aged man, the bartender and owner, saw right away that Sherlock was joking and nodded in agreement. It would have been fine if he hadn't nodded, but the fact that he did frightened Thor, and without a second thought, he grabbed his powerful arm, grabbed Sherlock's neck, and dragged him out of the bar. He was the Asgardian god of war, the son of Odin, the god of thunder, and Sherlock actually asked him to dance? If his brother and his friends in Asgard found out, the prospect would be so tantalizing that Thor felt goosebumps at the mere thought, completely forgetting that there was no stage for him to perform in the tavern. Thankfully, Sherlock was only joking and had no intention of actually asking Thor to sell his body, though there was no place for that, which Sherlock regretted. After a noisy breakfast, the two of them finally found a job for him, a pet shop clerk. Seeing the sturdy Thor, wearing a pink apron, carefully caring for cats and dogs, Sherlock couldn't help but laugh. With Sherlock's help, Thor had found some stability. Jane Foster, Sherlock, and Daisy Louise all began to settle down. During the day, Sherlock would read a book, watch TV, or go out for a stroll and a meal at the inn. Daisy Louise and Jane Foster would continue their academic research together. Sol diligently worked to earn money, carefully dealing with the advances of pet owners. In the evenings, they would gather at the tavern for a drink and a chat about the day's events. But gradually, Sherlock and Daisy Louise noticed something was amiss. Sol had been flirting with Jane. As close friends, Sherlock and Daisy Louise couldn't ignore this. Fearing both their brother's hardship and their brother's Land Rover, they quickly formed an alliance, one responsible for Jane, the other for soul, and absolutely no progress would be made. Daisy Louise simply couldn't accept the fact that her friend was dating an alien, while Sherlock simply couldn't accept the fact that Soul, so foolish as he was, had a partner. But after all, they were just friends, not aunts, and Jane and Soul always found opportunities to flirt, much to Sherlock and Daisy Louise's frustration. One particular day, coincidentally, the weekend, the four of them had agreed to go on a local road trip in Jane's SUV. However, when Sherlock and Daisy Louise arrived at Jane's door, it wasn't Jane herself who opened it, but Thor. Sherlock and Daisy Louise exchanged glances, realizing their alliance was futile. Ultimately, Thor robbed Daisy Louise of Jane's home, and Sherlock, a single man, was brutally betrayed by Thor. Damn it. They'd agreed to live together in singleness until death, and whoever left first would be the loser. How could Thor and Jane betray their revolutionary friendship? Ultimately, after Sherlock and Daisy Louise's agonizing and threatening actions, Jane and Thor finally admitted their relationship, effectively concluding it. This left Sherlock and Daisy Louise feeling deeply humiliated, with a hint of helplessness in each other's eyes. At one point, neither of them showed much interest in the rest of the journey. It even became so intense that Soul and Jane were flirting in the backseat, while Sherlock and Daisy Louise chatted in the front. The two groups went their separate ways, completely separate. Even after returning, Sherlock and Daisy Louise left without even saying goodbye to Jane or Soul. After being third-wheeled all day, they both felt they shouldn't be in the car, but underneath it. 4 days passed peacefully after Jane and Soul admitted their relationship. Finally, on the morning of the 5th day, Sherlock received some excellent news. The insurance company called to say his new Raptor would be delivered to town that morning. Sherlock had been anticipating this all morning, and finally, at noon, a top-of-the-line, off-road-ready Raptor arrived at Sherlock's hotel on a flatbed truck. After signing a series of paperwork, Sherlock gazed upon his beloved second-generation car with great joy. Good news is worth sharing. Sherlock didn't even have time to remove the film from his new car before Jane and Daisy Louise dragged him to a restaurant to celebrate. Thor had come after the three of them arrived at the restaurant, during their lunch break at the pet shop. But compared to Sherlock and the others' jubilation, Thor's face was filled with sadness. Under their questioning, Thor finally revealed the truth. His younger brother Loki had come to see him that morning, and from him, he'd learned that his father, Odin, the god king of Asgard, had passed away. Stripped of his divine power, Thor couldn't even return to see his father for one last time. Jane and Daisy Louise comforted Thor after learning this. Only Sherlock knew this was all Loki's scheme, and that Thor's final story was about to begin. Looks like I need to hurry up and make some preparations, Sherlock thought to himself as he comforted the naive Thor. Chapter 39 The grand drama begins. Although Sherlock had long known that Odin was fine, he still put on a show of comforting Thor. Once Thor had finally recovered from the grief of his father's death and had begun to resolve to live a good life on Earth, returning to the divine realm to pay his father's respects once he had regained his divine power, Sherlock finally spoke and dealt Thor another devastating blow. Sherlock explained that he had been waiting in the town largely to await his new car, which had arrived. He planned to stay up all night to make some potions and prepare for his next trip. He told everyone not to wait for him for lunch tomorrow, but to gather in the evening, as he would leave the town the next morning. Thor, barely recovering from the loss of his father, hadn't had time to recover when he heard the devastating news of Sherlock's departure. For a moment, he acted like a discarded dog. Jane, Daisy Louise, and Sherlock all got goosebumps. Can you imagine what it would be like to have Su Jinjiang, with Schwarzenegger's body, sob in front of you? Thor felt much the same way right now. Sherlock and the others finally managed to convince Thor to accept the double blow of losing his father and his friend. Seeing that Thor was fine, they parted ways. After all, aside from Sherlock, the others still had work to do that afternoon. As Sherlock strolled towards the inn, he noticed a few figures in black suits appearing in obscure corners of town. However, compared to himself, Sherlock noticed that they were more focused on Thor and Jane. If nothing unexpected happened, it was likely that the SHIELD team had found some evidence in Jane's files that Thor was an alien, after all, according to the style of the black sauce egg. On Earth alone, he hated anything beyond his control. He harbored a deep malice towards those beyond Earth. So, could Sherlock consider Braised Egg a pure political zealot, discriminating against all non-Earth creatures? It seemed reasonable to assume so. Sherlock's thoughts drifted as he returned to his hotel. After closing the door, his previously relaxed expression slowly turned serious. He pulled out his wand and cast a confusion charm over his room, making it appear as if the occupants were constantly seated at the table, occupied. Sherlock then sat on the bed and began to plan his next move. Logically, since he hadn't used Restore to restore his beloved car, it made sense that Odin wouldn't say anything about his attack on Odin's destroyer armor. Now the question was which potion would have a more effective side effect. After much deliberation, Sherlock gritted his teeth and used his meager gold to buy a bottle of Elixir of Fortune. After all, Sherlock didn't believe his luck would remain this bad. After all, Sherlock leisurely turned on the TV, found the program he liked, and began watching it. He planned to go to bed early to rest up for tomorrow's battle. As Sherlock had predicted, the next morning, Thor had just arrived at the pet store, preparing to begin his day of pet shopping, when the sky above the town suddenly began to darken. In a matter of moments, the sky above the town darkened, and the next second, a massive beam of light suddenly impacted the area not far from the town. The townspeople and SHIELD personnel were unaware of what had happened, but Thor, a true Asgardian, saw it clearly. It was the opening of the Rainbow Bridge. If nothing unexpected happened, it meant that Asgardians were approaching their vicinity. Thor was incredibly excited, rushing out onto the street. The next moment, 4 familiar figures appeared in his sight, 3 men and 1 woman, his close friends, or drinking buddies, from Asgard. Thor was overjoyed at their arrival. It was one of the few things that had made him happy amidst all the recent misfortunes. Without hesitation, he took a day off from the shop, determined to take his friends to experience the difference between Earth beer and Asgard beer. Of course, Thor hadn't forgotten his friends back on Earth. He summoned Jane, Daisy Louise, and the doctor. If Sherlock hadn't repeatedly told him to rest yesterday, Thor might have already been knocking on Sherlock's door with a large group. After 3 rounds of drinks in the tavern, the Asgardian quartet brought Thor some shocking news. Odin was fine, merely in a deep sleep. This news excited Thor immensely. After all, anyone would be overjoyed to know that their father, long thought deceased, was still alive and well, merely sleeping. But then, Thor became puzzled as to why Loki had deceived him. As a simpleton, Thor didn't know Loki's intentions. But right now, it was clear that his friend was the most important thing. Nothing was more important than entertaining him. Just as they were toasting and enjoying themselves, the sky darkened again. A beam of light, similar to the previous one, instantly descended in the exact same spot. The 2 massive energy bombardments had even darkened some of the ground. As the beams dissipated, a tall, silvery figure gradually emerged. It was none other than the destroyer armor Sherlock had been dreaming of. Such a large movement naturally caught Sherlock's attention. Sherlock had noticed the first beam of light from the Rainbow Bridge descended and immediately began to arrange the room according to his plan. The confusion spell was changed to make it look like he was sleeping in bed, and just to be on the safe side, Sherlock even used transfiguration to create a fake version of himself, lying on the bed with headphones on. The dummy was no different from Sherlock except that he couldn't speak and couldn't wake up. Even his breathing movements were perfectly restored under Sherlock's magic. After completing the disguise, Sherlock put on his equipment, put on his wizard vest again, and cast an invisibility spell on himself. Then he looked in the direction of the town entrance, as if expecting something. Seeing that the huge silver-white figure that was destroying everything was becoming clearer and clearer, Sherlock's smile began to grow bigger and bigger. He took out the prepared potion, looked at the approaching destroyer armor, and muttered softly. The show is about to begin. Chapter 40, Sherlock Holmes, Part 1. Seeing the destroyer armor he'd been longing for draw ever closer, Sherlock no longer hesitated and downed the elixir in his hand in one gulp. As the elixir entered his mouth, Sherlock felt the world suddenly become clearer. Even some magic he'd struggled to understand for a long time suddenly became clear. But the next moment, Sherlock's vision began to blur, as if it had been blurred. Within a matter of moments, the world around him became a paradise of blocks and mosaics. Unsure of what was happening, Sherlock hurriedly checked the potion's weight. Entry: Block Revolution. Entry effect: Have you ever played Mick? Young man, now you possess all of Steve's abilities. Start a revolution. The world will eventually be ruled by blocks. Entry time: 23 hours, 59 minutes, and 9 seconds. Looking at the entry's explanation, Sherlock felt a cold sweat break out on his forehead and was speechless. For some reason, his entry was starting to sound even more naive. But putting that minor issue aside, Sherlock was incredibly pleased with the results of this entry. This African had finally gotten lucky. After all, it was Steve, a being who could literally wield anything. With Steve's abilities, Sherlock was confident he could sculpt the destroyer armor into a cube and then store it in his library. Sherlock felt that even Odin himself wouldn't be able to take it away. Then, he could study the forging alchemy of the dwarves and combine it with his own alchemy from Harry Potter, surely crafting his own armor. After all, think of how Benedict Cumberbatch and the others could instantly transform into combat form simply by waving their scarves, while Tony could simply pat his chest and transform with his nano armor. Sherlock didn't want to be the only one putting on his own gear piece by piece. That wouldn't be cool. Sherlock wanted a stylish transformation, too. After all, no male creature could resist a stylish transformation, and that applied to any age. Sherlock, fully prepared, vanished from his room with a distorting sound. When he reappeared, he was standing on the rooftop of a house very close to the battlefield. While invisible, Sherlock didn't attract anyone's attention. However, the high-profile destroyer armor was a different story. The moment it entered the town, it immediately caught the attention of the Asgardians and Thor. Knowing Thor had lost his divine power, the Asgardians, knowing full well that the destroyer armor was powerful, stood firm to stop the destroyer armor's advance. As Thor's friends, they all knew the destroyer armor's power, but they didn't flinch. The sole female member of the group, after giving the other three a look, quickly detoured to cut off the destroyer armor's path. The remaining three men were no pushovers either. Years of battle with Thor had cultivated a perfect rapport. Two relatively thin men rushed forward, stopping not far from the destroyer armor and simply waving behind them. Standing behind, the bearded man, axe in hand, launched his own charge. The moment he approached the two, they swiftly grasped his body and, with all their might, flung him towards the destroyer armor. With the two's assistance, the bearded man flew towards the destroyer armor like a cannonball, his axe held high, poised to deliver a devastating blow. However, the men clearly underestimated the destroyer armor's ferocity. The cannonball-like speed of the bearded man seemed like slow motion to the destroyer armor. With a single kick, he sent the flying bearded man careening into a car. Before the bearded man could react, he easily knocked over the remaining two men rushing to his aid, arrived in front of him, and opened his visor. Instantly, flames imbued with destructive properties began to brew within the destroyer armor, and a look of fear crossed the bearded man's face. The next moment, his fear gave way to triumph. The reason was simple. The female warrior, who had cut in from the side, finally reached the battlefield. Leaping high, she used gravity to instantly thrust her spear through the back of the destroyer's neck, pinning it to the ground. With her best of the best attack, the destroyer seemed to have sustained significant damage, its flames vanishing in an instant. Seeing the attack had seemingly worked, excitement spread across the faces of several soldiers. But before their joy lasted long, the destroyer, seemingly powerless, activated once more, its armor plate spinning continuously, its entire body shifting from a prone position to a supine position at breakneck speed. The flames within the armor also grew increasingly intense. The female warrior atop the destroyer's armor's expression instantly changed. With a single dodge, she dodged the destroyer's flames. The bearded man, resting on the hood of the car, also quickly moved away from the destroyer. At that moment, Sherlock suddenly appeared. Donning his oversized wizarding gear, he materialized behind the destroyer armor with a distorted space. He extended his sinister hands, placed them on the destroyer armor's arms, and began rubbing them rapidly. Sherlock's sudden appearance and strange movements brought the entire battlefield to a standstill. Even the powerful destroyer armor and Loki, who was controlling it, were a bit bewildered. No one understood what this sudden figure was doing. The next second, with a bang like a balloon popping, the destroyer armor's arms suddenly shrank countless times and fell to the ground. They didn't just fall, but instead slowly floated and twirled, like merchandise in a display case. Without hesitation, Sherlock waved his wand, and in an instant, the two shrunken arms were grasped by Sherlock. With a whirring sound, Sherlock vanished from the battlefield once more. Sherlock, who came and went in a hurry, completely disrupted the situation on the battlefield. The destroyer armor, which had lost its arm, was stunned for a moment and then seemed to be enraged. It straightened up in an instant and began to attack the Asgardian group of four crazily. Chapter 41, Sherlock Holmes, Part 2. While the Asgardians were being beaten, Sherlock was happily finding a quiet spot in his library to study the Destroyer's arm. While Sherlock still saw the Destroyer's arm as a blocky shape, this didn't stop him from researching. In just a few moments, Sherlock had a rough understanding of the Destroyer's armor's basic principles. It was similar to Thor's Stormbreaker, with magical runes imprinted into the armor during forging. The difference was that the Destroyer's armor was constructed piece by piece, and as armor, it didn't have the same high standards as a weapon. Because of this, Sherlock could clearly see the alchemical runes within the empty armor. Thankfully, Sherlock had crammed in a lot of alchemy knowledge, and while he didn't know the meaning of every rune, he had a general idea of their function, energy transmission. Crucially, the alchemical and magical runes used by the dwarves to forge weapons for Asgard share both similarities and differences with those in the Harry Potter world. This was what piqued Sherlock's curiosity. No magician could resist new knowledge, or even new applications for old ones. Originally planning to steal some materials for his own alchemy, Sherlock, driven by curiosity, immediately decided to retrieve the entire High Destroyer armor, no matter what. Even if he couldn't get everything, he had to retrieve the embedded power core. Sherlock had a hunch that it would be extremely useful. Having made his decision, Sherlock left his library without hesitation and returned to the edge of the battlefield. However, upon returning, Sherlock discovered that Thor had already regained his divine power. He was swinging his Meowth hammer in midair, gathering the force of thunder to cosplay as a helicopter. Knowing the plot, Sherlock's expression changed drastically. The reason was simple: Sherlock knew that in just a few moments, Thor, the prodigal son, would reduce his father's destroyer armor to scrap. With a roar of "Ham it down," Sherlock immediately apparated behind the destroyer armor and extended his sinister hand towards it. Well, due to his height, when standing on the same level as the destroyer armor, Sherlock could only reach below the destroyer armor's chest. Therefore, Sherlock wanted to rub the entire destroyer armor off, and the best way was to start from the buttocks and work his way up. Although that was the word, the action was, well, obscene. It could even be said that, aside from the Japanese specialty products where Sherlock performed this extremely obscene back-scrubbing service, few people in the real world had ever witnessed such obscene actions, unless it was in the bedroom. Whether it was the spectators from SHIELD, Jane, Daisy Louise, the Doctor, or even the severely injured Asgardians, their expressions became strange. Even Thor, who had been so solemn in mid-air, began to look strange. For a moment, he even began to doubt whether he should disturb the destroyer armor and the pervert below. The only two people on the battlefield who didn't feel anything were Sherlock and the destroyer armor, the accuser, or rather, Loki, who was controlling the destroyer armor. After all, Loki was completely focused on his good friend and brother, Thor the Hammer God, and didn't notice Sherlock tampering with the destroyer armor from behind. But soon, even if Loki didn't want to notice, he couldn't. With 3 consecutive bangs, the destroyer armor's helmet, chestplate, and iron pants were transformed into the same shape as its arms by Sherlock's friction. Loki instantly lost control of the destroyer armor, as if the connection had failed. It shrank several times and fell to the ground, swirling like an exhibit in a display case. Sherlock quickly retrieved the fallen armor and its 2 remaining thighs and swiftly collected them in his library. As he pulled the armor off, Sherlock also spotted the location of the destroyer armor's power core. Damn! He didn't know if Loki's skills were inadequate or if it was designed that way during forging, but the power core for such a massive and imposing armor was contained within its underpants. As he stowed the armor away in his library, Sherlock even imagined Odin wearing the destroyer armor with a certain malice. Honestly, wouldn't it be terribly annoying? Sherlock seemed to understand why Odin, the king of the gods, only had 2 biological children, Hela and Thor. Anyone else with 2 would be incredibly lucky. Seeing his goal achieved, Sherlock didn't hesitate, apparating from the spot, reappearing in his own room the next moment. As expected, Coulson stood there, his eyes vacant, clearly bewildered by the confusion spell. Without hesitation, Sherlock began to remove his gear, preparing for the next scene. Outside, Thor, who had been gathering his power in midair for a long time, was feeling rather uncomfortable. After gathering his strength for so long, he was about to deliver a thunderous blow, only to be beaten to the punch by a pervert. Thor's face flushed with frustration. Reluctantly, he withdrew his divine power, descended to the ground, and began to bid farewell to Jane. Now that he had regained his divine power, He had to return to the divine realm to deal with his mischievous brother. As Thor and Jane said their affectionate goodbyes, Sherlock cleaned up the scene, lying on his bed and removing the spell. He watched as Callison anxiously rushed over to him and yanked him out of the covers. Sherlock, a masterful actor, stared at the anxious Callison with a bewildered expression. Callison, without hesitation, briefly explained the situation and prepared to rush Sherlock to safety. But as the two rushed out the door, Callison was stunned. The scene of the towering silver armor battling aliens was completely gone. All that was left was a scarred town with smoke billowing everywhere. Sherlock readily looked at the bewildered Callison with a look of astonishment, but the next moment, Sherlock's face changed. His beloved car. Where was his giant cock? His newly arrived cock, the one he hadn't even had time to remove the membrane from? Why was there only a pool of red molten iron on the ground? Sherlock, his face as black as the bottom of a pot, pointed at the still red molten iron on the ground and stared at the bewildered Callison beside him. "My dear Agent Callison, I think I need you to give me a complete explanation for my big cock. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelis. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels." Chapter 42 Daily Complaints. Frankly, Callison was also incredibly speechless about Sherlock's request. After all, it was such a coincidence. The first time, that mysterious hammer had descended from the sky, smashing the young man's beloved car to pieces. The scene was truly horrific. Honestly, if it weren't for the young man's skill, it's doubtful he'd even seen him at all. The second time, this time, was when the new car, which had just arrived yesterday and even Callison thought was a good car, was ambushed by the mysterious New York magician mid-battle between the aliens and the silver armor. The enraged silver armor began to fire indiscriminately, meticulously scraping Sherlock's penis. If Callison hadn't been absolutely certain Sherlock had nothing to do with the silver armor, he would have suspected Sherlock was colluding with the aliens to commit insurance fraud. After all, if such a thing were to be made public, the insurance company wouldn't believe it, and they would be desperate to find some evidence to prove you're a fraud. Just as Callison was about to say something to Sherlock, a roar erupted from the sky not far away. Along with the roar, a streak of fire appeared on the horizon. In a matter of moments, the streak of fire grew closer as everyone watched. They finally realized what it was: Iron Man, Tony Stark himself. With a classic superhero landing, Tony landed right next to Sherlock. Sherlock was deeply disdainful of Tony's lateness, arriving only after a matter was resolved, and his posing pose upon landing. He rolled his eyes in annoyance, but Sherlock didn't even give Tony a chance to talk, simply slapping him on the back of his head. Tony, unconcerned with Sherlock's attitude, turned and began to converse with Callison. Sherlock showed no interest in what they were saying. His mind was preoccupied with his raptor, and he even began to wonder if using Restore to restore the molten iron on the ground to its original form would be too much of a stretch for his magic. Just as Sherlock was considering how to restore his beloved car to its original state, Tony grabbed Sherlock's shoulders from behind and dragged Sherlock to a deserted place without saying a word. Sherlock, a mortal, could not resist Tony in his iron armor unless he used magic. But now, in broad daylight, Sherlock had just successfully detached his armor by pulling off a trick of substituting a cat for a prince in front of Callison. Naturally, he wouldn't abandon his skills and use magic in public, so he let Tony drag him to a deserted place nearby. Finding a deserted place, Tony scanned Sherlock without saying a word. After confirming that there were no eavesdropping devices around Sherlock or anywhere else, he opened his visor and looked at Sherlock seriously. "Hey, brat, I should have told you that SHIELD is a very deep hole. You shouldn't have any contact with them, especially with those magical potions of yours." Sherlock rolled his eyes at Tony's words before shrugging his shoulders and replying, "Come on, Tony, when those guys were investigating my identity last time, I doubt they didn't ask you. Since they've been thwarted by you, they can only start investigating the people around you. Pepper was with Callison at the time, so she's naturally not a suspect. Does that leave me alone? SHIELD isn't stupid. When that hammer fell from the sky and hit my car, they were only slightly behind the insurance company. If you keep everything about me secret, it'll only make SHIELD suspicious, especially their boss. He's a man who's always suspicious, Tony thought carefully about Sherlock's statement and nodded in agreement, especially the part about Nick Fury. Just thinking about that black salted egg made Tony feel that Sherlock was absolutely right. But as an elder, he still had to intervene. At least until he died, Tony still felt the need to act as a barrier between Sherlock and SHIELD. After all, in his opinion, SHIELD's reputation was shady. Okay, there's nothing wrong with what you say, but I still object to you having direct contact with SHIELD. Believe me, Sherlock, this isn't a good idea. Tony, still projecting his uncle's authority, spoke sternly to Sherlock. Although he knew Sherlock was telling the truth, he still didn't want Sherlock to have too much contact with SHIELD at that point. Upon hearing Tony's words, Sherlock's eyes flickered with a sly smile, like a thief whose plan had succeeded, but he remained serious as he looked at Tony and replied, "Okay, I get it. I won't have too much contact with SHIELD, just a simple potion deal at most, and I intend for you to be the middleman." Tony nodded in satisfaction at the first half of Sherlock's words, but the second half completely broke Tony's defenses, and he stared at Sherlock with wide eyes. "What?" Tony's question interrupted his train of thought. Sherlock glared at the stunned Tony. After gathering his thoughts, he continued, "Don't make a fuss. I'm telling you I'm going to use you as the middleman. I'll just be responsible for providing the potions. Simply put, I'm just the factory, and you're the supplier. And I definitely won't give them too much. Only small quantities of 3 kinds, the antidote, the white moss potion for wounds, and a very small amount of polyjuice potion. I've already told Kelson I'll only accept gold in exchange, don't you understand, Uncle?" As Sherlock finished speaking, Tony, a businessman, almost instinctively understood what Sherlock meant. Sherlock hadn't specified the price of the potions. Based on the principle that rare goods are valuable, this meant Tony could raise the price as he pleased. Furthermore, these potions wouldn't just be potions, they could be used as capital to exchange for things other than gold, especially for SHIELD in its current state. After understanding what Sherlock meant, the two men, one big and one small, instantly showed fox-like smiles. They no longer felt disgusted when looking at the SHIELD staff members wearing black suits around them. Instead, their eyes were shining, as if they saw a pile of walking gold coins. Chapter 43 Follow-up and Departure. The uncle and nephew quickly reached an agreement. For Sherlock, it was his own money, and since the potion production was so low, it wouldn't be a problem for him to triple or quadruple the price and sell it to SHIELD. For Tony, it was even more so. He could take it directly from Sherlock, so it wouldn't be a big deal for him to double the price and sell it to SHIELD. Compared to the big players like SHIELD, Tony Stark, am just a small businessman. You are a government agency after all, so you can't let me sell it to you at a loss, right? It just so happened that neither Tony nor Sherlock liked the current SHIELD, so it wouldn't be too much of a stretch for them to team up and screw them over, right? Well, the world, with only SHIELD hurt, was reached in an instant. After the two quickly reached a consensus on the matter, Tony leaned close to Sherlock's ear and whispered in a low voice, "You got that magical armor, brat?" Sherlock rolled his eyes at Tony's words. After all this time, even using SHIELD as a prelude, Tony's ultimate goal turned out to be the destroyer armor in his own library. Giving Tony a sullen, "Do you think you're talking human?" look, Sherlock hesitantly nodded. Seeing Sherlock nod, Tony's eyes lit up, and he became visibly excited. But before Tony could say anything, Sherlock poured cold water on him. "Forget about it now. First, I haven't fully researched it yet, so I've put it away. And I can't guarantee that the person controlling it will still be able to operate it if I take it out now. Second, it's a magical thing. A techie like you won't be able to use it, so why are you so excited?" Despite Sherlock's blunt words, Tony refused to give up and began to argue. The two engaged in a heated debate, ranging from alchemy to circuits, from programming to control, from energy cores to armor materials. In the end, Sherlock was defeated. He lamented that he didn't learn enough when he needed it, and silently cursed Tony for being unethical. His range of topics was too broad, pushing Sherlock's knowledge too far. Finally, Sherlock had no choice but to make two requests. First, he wanted to find him a suit of armor later. Sherlock also wanted to experience what it was like to fly home at super high speeds. Second, he wanted Tony to find a way to get SHIELD to pay for his car. After all, if Sherlock called the insurance company again, Not only would they be thinking about blacklisting him, but Sherlock himself would be a bit embarrassed. And this time, Sherlock decided not to take the car, but to ask for money. Sherlock felt that this place didn't suit him. His beloved car had been broken down here twice, and if nothing unexpected happened, Thor and the others would have already returned to Asgard, and there was no telling when they would return. Furthermore, the destroyer armor in his library had intrigued Sherlock, so he had no desire to continue his road trip and only wanted to return as soon as possible to research his new equipment. Tony readily agreed to Sherlock's request. Without hesitation, he contacted Jarvis and asked him to bring over the Mark II prototype he had in the warehouse. Then he went to meet Coulson to do business. Seeing Tony go to meet Coulson, Sherlock didn't care and began to wander around town, hoping to find Jane and the others. And to be honest, Sherlock actually found them. Jane still believed Thor would return soon, and she stared at the sky eagerly, as if waiting for the Rainbow Bridge to open. However, what Jane didn't know was that her brother, so called for his true love, was probably already swinging his hammer and smashing the bridge. Seeing Jane, who looked like a waiting stone, Sherlock felt a little sorry for her. After all, he had been with Jane and her group for a long time, and Sherlock had long considered them friends. After much deliberation, Sherlock finally pulled them to a deserted place and explained Thor's situation to Jane, Daisy Louise, the doctor, and the others. Sherlock even explained the love-hate relationship between Loki and Thor in Asgard. Daisy Louise was fine at first, but after hearing what Sherlock said, the look in her eyes when she looked at Jane changed. After all, according to Sherlock, Thor and Loki were true love, and Jane was at most a mistress in front of these two brothers. Jane, however, clearly had no such intentions. After learning that the Rainbow Bridge had been destroyed by Salvir to save some innocent lives, preventing Thor from visiting Earth for a while, Jane even began to plan what research she could do to get to Asgard. Seeing Jane, preoccupied with love, Sherlock and Daisy Louise both rolled their eyes, lamenting the blindness of love. However, this did rekindle Jane's resolve and allow her to return to her beloved research, which was far better than being a waitress. The only one who remained relatively lucid was the doctor. Although he was filled with curiosity about Sherlock's description of Asgard and even lamented the love-hate relationship between Loki and Thor, the doctor remained remarkably lucid. After Daisy Louise accompanied Jane away, the doctor pulled Sherlock aside to question his confusion about Sherlock's knowledge. Sherlock simply smiled enigmatically and said nothing more. The doctor, however, seemed to have a look of sudden enlightenment, and then promised to keep it a secret. Sherlock was bewildered, unsure of what to say. Maintaining his superior persona, he smiled and nodded, then said goodbye to Jane and Daisy Louise before hurriedly leaving. By the time Sherlock returned to his motel, Tony had already finished his negotiations with Coulson. Both seemed extremely satisfied with the other's offer, smiles plastered on their faces. The Mark II, one of Tony's requirements, was standing behind Tony. Seeing Sherlock's return, Tony finally said hello to Coulson and approached Sherlock, his silver Mark II in hand. "You're finally back. I've got your requirements covered. Come on, I'll help you put on the Mark II, and then we'll go back to New York together," Tony said, raising the arm of his armor. The gauntlet transformed, revealing a variety of tools. Sherlock's mouth twitched, remembering that Tony's armor still required the assistance of a robotic arm to don it. Damn, that was sloppy. Chapter 44: Upgrading Equipment to New Level. Iron Man's suit is certainly impressive and packed with cutting-edge technology, but it all relies on the assistance of a robotic arm. Without the robotic arm, manually donning it becomes a complete social failure, not a matter of cool. Sherlock experienced this very socially destructive moment. Tony helped Sherlock don the Mark II suit entirely by hand, in full view of the public. To Sherlock, this was like taking a dump in public. Even as Tony excitedly disassembled the Mark II and beckoned Sherlock to come and stand, a deeply moving question inexplicably popped up in his mind. Imagine you're in the shower when a disaster occurs in the bathhouse, a disaster that quickly captures national attention. Outside, the scene is filled with reporters, onlookers, and live-streaming social media. As a survivor, you're rescued with only a towel to cover your face. Would you use it to cover your face or your private parts? Sherlock had initially thought it was just a joke, never expecting he'd find himself in a similar situation. Sherlock's choice was simple: cover his face. He forced Tony to put on the armor's helmet and visor. Sherlock didn't care about the rest. Socially, So what? As long as I covered my face, I had nothing to be ashamed of. Despite the socially devastating experience, Sherlock still had a high opinion of Tony's Mark armor. Just the thought of flying through the air at supersonic speeds was enough to make Sherlock forget the socially devastating experience. And being the sensible guy he was, Sherlock was only trying Tony's armor for a test drive. After all, it was fine as a toy for Sherlock, but seriously, how could flying faster than a portal be faster? Sherlock was now a master at teleporting from far away and apparating from close range. After a roughly 1-hour flight, the two finally arrived back in New York. After landing, Sherlock removed his armor and apparated away from Tony's villa. An hour later, Sherlock returned to Tony's house in the custom Shelby Raptor Baja he'd purchased with the SHIELD compensation. Tony's expression brightened slightly. Initially, he'd thought Sherlock had run away. Sherlock's persuasion finally calmed him down, and he believed Sherlock had done nothing wrong. After all, it was SHIELD compensation. If he didn't spend it properly, not only Sherlock, but even Tony himself would have felt a bit unreliable. After all, that black egg gave off a cunning and treacherous image. After securing his car, Sherlock gave Tony a destroyer armor arm and retreated to the library to begin researching the destroyer armor's core. Although Tony was rather displeased at being given only one arm, he couldn't do anything about Sherlock, so he immediately plunged into researching the destroyer armor. While each worked independently, they did manage to uncover some insights. Tony, while still unable to fully decipher the destroyer armor's metal composition, was deeply inspired by its structure, and he designed a classic folding steel armor, the Mark V. However, due to its compact size, the new armor's protection and attack capabilities were significantly reduced, making it far less effective than the Mark IV Tony currently wore. As for Sherlock, isolated in the library, he wasn't worried about anyone discovering his research on the core. He made bold assumptions and carefully verified them, quickly figuring out what the core was. If nothing unexpected happened, it was likely similar to the sun, relying on magical runes to lock in its power. It was also through these runes that Loki could remotely control the armor. Sherlock quickly erased the remote control runes within the core, revealing the destroyer armor in its entirety. Seeing Sherlock finally unleashed his magic, Tony hesitated no longer, and the two of them delved into the destroyer armor like idiots. With Sherlock's magical knowledge and Tony's ingenuity, they quickly figured out what they needed. Sherlock used alchemical techniques to craft a collar-like device from the destroyer core. The golden energy core was nestled in the center of an ornately jeweled collar buckle, providing power and amplification for Sherlock's armor. Sherlock's armor? No, it couldn't be called armor anymore, it would be more accurately called a combat suit. Sherlock had crafted a suit imbued with magical allure using the destroyer metal. The overall design was inspired by the costume of Elias Ainsuisse, the protagonist of the anime The Ancient Magus Bride, which Sherlock had seen before his time travel. The helmet, however, was the same one Tony had given Sherlock. Rather than a complete copy of Elias Ainsuisse's, Sherlock had directly integrated the helmet's functionality with his suit. It wasn't just flashy, most importantly, it offered considerable protection. Tony had tested it, and a single shot from his palm cannon couldn't do much damage. Of course, Sherlock had also achieved the quick transformation feature he'd longed for. With a simple tug on the collar buckle, he could change outfits instantly. Thanks to the almighty magic and the help of the traceless expansion charm. Of course, Tony couldn't afford to neglect one thing while neglecting the other. While experiments had shown that the metal used in the destroyer armor wasn't a perfect substitute for palladium, it was still far more durable than current Earth metals. Especially since Sherlock had plenty of materials left over after refining his own suit, he naturally wouldn't let these precious materials go to waste. He poured them all into Tony's Mark V, even giving it a magical boost. Faced with Sherlock's epic upgrade, the Mark V, originally intended only for emergency use, even surpassed the defenses of the standard Mark IV. Even its sole weapon, the palm cannon, gained armor-piercing capabilities. Of course, this came at a significant cost. The Mark V's energy consumption rate skyrocketed. Later, Tony was forced to add a miniature arc reactor to the Mark V to keep up. Chapter 45, Mission completed. A genius in magic, a genius in technology. Working together, fueled by a variety of wild and imaginative ideas, their armor was completed with remarkable speed and, at this stage, nearing perfection. After completing their respective equipment, it was time for the demonstration. Sherlock and Tony faced each other, donning their respective suits. Sherlock's magic was truly masterful. With a simple tug on his tie, his magically distinctive black suit with dark gold patterns and jacket with the gold trim twisted and flew out from the tie's clasp. In the blink of an eye, it clung to Sherlock's body. The next second, Sherlock, who had been standing still, was transformed into a gentleman wearing a cyberpunk-inspired helmet and an exceptionally well-fitting suit. Sherlock embodied the mystery and elegance of magic to the extreme. Meanwhile, Tony, demonstrating technology to its fullest, rapidly enveloped his entire body with a simple push, a lift, and a pull of his suitcase-sized Mark V. Countless armor plates, like a suit of armor, converged piece by piece, enveloping Tony's body. Because of Sherlock, the Mark V's chest reactor was expanded from 1 to 2, arranged one above the other, due to increased energy consumption compared to the original. After donning the suit, both reactors illuminated simultaneously, emitting a bright, capsule-like glow. Inspired by the destroyer armor and aided by Sherlock's magic, Tony's Mark V could even pivot and shift armor plates to focus on heavy attacks. With the addition of the destroyer's metal, the Mark V's overall upgrade was significant, even reminiscent of Tony's later stage nanosuit. Each possessed their own unique characteristics, but once they donned their respective suits, they were left speechless at the sight of each other's. Whether it was due to the inherent incompatibility between the scientific and magical sides, or perhaps because Sherlock was a wizard and Tony was a hardcore troll, the two began to taunt each other with sardonic remarks from the moment they appeared. In Tony's opinion, Sherlock's suit was useless except for its ostentation. It was riddled with holes. If Tony thought of it, Sherlock's cuffs, trouser legs, and everything else would be vulnerable. He could even come up with at least 5 different methods of attack: poison gas, insects, nanoworms, and so on. In Tony's opinion, Sherlock's suit was useless except for defending against a sneak attack from Yeshaleolu. Sherlock's armor, on the other hand, looked not much different from those of medieval knights, especially with the destroyer armor plates, which made it look more like a tin can covered in scale armor. To be blunt, in a real team fight, Tony's role would be nothing more than the frontline MT, a tough-as-nails unit, the only difference being the same, unassuming color. The two's tacit disdain for each other, followed by their unanimous complaints, had Pepper, a spectator, practically cracking up. She even felt like a mistress, interfering in Sherlock and Tony's relationship. Thankfully, Pepper was only thinking about it and didn't reveal it. Otherwise, Sherlock and Tony's expressions wouldn't just be disdain, but outright disgust, no discrimination intended, simply for the plot. After a lengthy argument, neither convinced the other, and naturally, they were too lazy to continue. Furthermore, after such a busy day, both Sherlock and Tony were genuinely hungry. Sherlock, in particular, had just finished his trip and headed straight to Tony's villa to begin his relentless research. Sherlock, in particular, needed a good meal to soothe his stomach. Fortunately, Pepper, as capable and shrewd as ever, had already anticipated the two's tendencies and had already made all the necessary arrangements. Sherlock naturally didn't bother with his uncle and future aunt. After quickly devouring a plethora of delicious, high-quality ingredients, he wiped his lips in satisfaction and prepared to depart for home. After all, he'd been away for so long, and now, feeling well-fed and well-fed, Sherlock missed his own soft bed and his kennel. Tony had no problem with Sherlock's departure, but he was deeply offended by the fact that Sherlock hadn't forgotten to bring a case of expensive wine from his cellar, enough to buy a raptor per bottle. It was clear, however, that Sherlock paid no heed to Tony's opinion. He simply tossed the wine into the back of his Shelby, secured it, and after a quick goodbye, he left behind 20 bottles of antidote, 10 bottles of white moss solution, and 2 bottles of polyjuice potion before driving off. Time was short, and Sherlock also needed to get gifts for his uncles. After all, he'd been away for so long, and if he didn't bring anything back, he'd be in for a rough time. Sherlock couldn't stand the pranks these military-trained uncles were pulling. Even thinking about it made him feel like he was going crazy. He quickly drove to a mall in the city center. Sherlock had a good plan. As someone who loves handkerchiefs, a more expensive, comfortable, dark-colored handkerchief would be enough to appease this gentleman. Even Ghost was easy to deal with. When crafting his own war armor, Sherlock took advantage of Tony's house and made a skull mask similar to his helmet. It even had an offline version of Jarvis built in. Combined with the Ghost's box of original skull masks, Ghost's combat power would definitely be taken to the next level. Old Man Price was even easier to deal with. He simply gave the Mediterranean grandfather a hat that was both practical and beautiful. After all, this gentleman never took his hat off in front of anyone. As for why Sherlock knew that this gentleman was a Mediterranean, Sherlock could only say that it was a mistake he made when he was young and ignorant. The price he paid for this mistake was so high that Sherlock could burst into tears just by talking about it. In short, it's all tears. As for the gifts from the remaining uncles, they were also easy to handle. This was the reason why he moved Tony's wine cellar. 2 bottles of good wine for each person. Neither Xiaoqiang nor Gates would have any objections, and they would even be happy for a long time. Xiaoqiang likes to collect all kinds of famous wines, and he has a collecting habit. As for Gates, he really likes to drink them, and he has been jealous of Xiaoqiang's collection for a long time. These small details also gave Sherlock a feeling that his uncles were real people and not characters from a game. In short, this feeling was unexpectedly good. Chapter 46, An Adopted Child Bride, Part 1. After finishing his sales, Sherlock sped off in his beloved car to his gun shop, turning heads along the way. In Lighthouse Country, a Raptor wouldn't normally turn heads, but a Shelby was different. As the epitome of high-end Ford customization, a Shelby's impact in Lighthouse Country was comparable to that of a supercar on the streets. Especially since Sherlock had borrowed some money from Tony to rip off SHIELD, and with a little more money to his name, he was able to afford the Shelby Raptor Baja Edition. Honestly, compared to the Raptor, this car's power, looks, and even suspension were all perfectly tailored to Sherlock's tastes, leaving him utterly dazzled. After speeding through the city, Sherlock floored the accelerator, displaying his Baja style, and finally arrived at his beloved gun shop before nightfall. Pushing open the door and smelling the familiar scent of gun oil and gunpowder smoke, Sherlock felt more at ease than ever. Carrying his gifts in a case of fine wine, Sherlock hummed a tune as he made his way upstairs to his kennel, intending to rest for the night before distributing the gifts the next day, once everyone had gathered. Just as Sherlock was about to push open the door, a pleasant female voice rang out, catching him off guard and nearly causing him to drop his belongings. "Excuse me, sir, this is a private area. To avoid any misunderstanding, please step aside." Though the voice's tone was gentle, its content was anything but gentle. It even held a hint of menace. This was a gun shop, filled with weapons. Even those who preferred to buy for free wouldn't dare set foot there. After all, the staff were armed with real weapons, and there was no telling if they'd actually be met with a barrage of bullets. But who was Sherlock? The only heir to the mortal knives of HP Magic, the nephew of Tony Stark, a frequent guest of the great Camartage, and the owner of New York's largest integrated firearms and training shop. How could Sherlock tolerate such an indignation? Sherlock wanted to see who had the audacity to stop him from returning to his doghouse. What the hell? Sherlock, once so confident, turned around, so frightened that the last few words of his confession trembled in his mind. The reason was simple. Sherlock saw someone strangely familiar. Skye, the shockwave girl from the TV series Agents of SHIELD. At this moment, Skye was still relatively young. Her eyes were fixed on Sherlock, who was carrying a large pile of things, with a serious expression, her hand resting on the pistol at her waist. It seemed that if Sherlock made any move, Skye would draw her gun without hesitation, demonstrating the true meaning of American IAI. Looking at Skye, who was still eager to fight, Sherlock was speechless for a moment. Had he really intruded upon a character's den? Damn, going out to play, I see Thor, and coming home, I see Quake. Just as Sherlock was questioning his life and Skye was growing increasingly nervous, the two men's movements finally caught the attention of the others. Sherlock's uncles and a young girl emerged from the back office area. "Sherlock? You're back," Soap exclaimed in delight upon seeing Sherlock and what he held in his hands. With Soap's shout, the once solemn warning suddenly became awkward. Skye, in particular, was embarrassed by the thought of pulling a gun on her boss. Thankfully, the uncles didn't care about their little story at all. After seeing what Sherlock held, they rushed over to divide the spoils and show off the gifts Sherlock had brought them. The only ones who remained rational were Price and the ghost standing behind him. They remained motionless throughout the entire process, instead watching Sherlock and Skye with considerable interest. Finally, under Price's gaze, Skye could only suppress her emotions and walked over to Sherlock, extending her hand. "Hello, Boss, I'm Sky. Colonel Price asked me to work the cashier, perhaps because the incident happened suddenly, coupled with the awkwardness that hadn't completely resolved. Sky's speech was a bit incoherent. Sherlock still hadn't recovered from the shock of his employee being the famous Shockwave girl, and shook Sky's hand in a daze. Sherlock's reaction made Sky, who was already a little embarrassed, even more embarrassed. Fortunately, at this moment, Zia Okiang noticed that Sherlock was not driving the original Raptor back, but the huge Shelby, and let out a strange cry. What the hell? What the hell did you do out there, you little brat? You brought back this good stuff. Without caring about Sherlock's reaction, he immediately snatched the car keys from Sherlock's hand. Then, with a wave of his hand, the group, who had been focused on the gift, quickly shifted their attention to the Shelby Raptor at the door. The men, already military veterans, couldn't resist the allure of this beast and followed Zia Okiang out, determined to experience what it was like to drive it. Sky, to avoid further embarrassment, naturally joined Zia Okiang's group and ran out. Only after Sky disappeared from the shop did Sherlock finally come to his senses. He looked at Price, standing behind him, somewhat dazed, and asked, "Excuse me, where did this guy come from?" Price shrugged at Sherlock's question. "I found it. You can't expect us to sit at the cash register and count those little green pieces of paper, right? Besides, I don't understand how to use the cash register machines. I saw this girl was good with computers, so I picked her up from the street and made her a cashier. If you don't like her, you can fire her." Faced with Price's words, Sherlock could only smile awkwardly before quickly saying it didn't matter. After all, Price was right. He couldn't sit behind the cash register forever. It was normal to have an employee. Seeing that Sherlock didn't seem to have any objection to Sky, Price nodded and glanced at the ghost behind him. The ghost immediately understood what Price meant and walked out with the mask Sherlock had given him. Only after the ghost left the store did Price look at the bustling crowd outside and the new car and speak meaningfully to Sherlock beside him. "It seems like you've encountered a lot of troubles outside this time. How is it going? Is there a tale?" Although Price said it lightly, Sherlock felt a chill on his back. After all, the old man Price meant that if there is any trouble that has not been solved, I will help you solve it. As for Price's solution, it was also very simple. Just push forward all the way and it will be okay. Sherlock even suspected that if his uncle really took action, not to mention that the passing dogs would have to be slapped twice, even the ant nests around the trouble would probably be filled with mercury. He quickly smiled and rejected Price's kindness. No, there is no tale. I'm just traveling. What trouble can I not solve by myself? Chapter 47, An Adopted Child Bride, Part 2. After hearing Sherlock's response, Price's previously icy face finally broke into a smile, transforming back into the familiar Uncle Sherlock knew. Even the surroundings seemed to lighten up a bit. Seeing Price's sternities, Sherlock finally looked at the little girl standing behind him. She was incredibly beautiful, and most importantly, she had beautiful green hair. The only thing that surprised Sherlock was that this girl, who looked like a Barbie doll, somehow gave off a somewhat unsexy vibe. Sherlock was incredibly curious about this girl, whom he had never met before, especially the fact that this unsexy girl was following behind the perpetually single Uncle Price. This alone was enough to make Sherlock's curiosity run wild. "By the way, Uncle Price, I've been wanting to ask you for a while now. Who is this little girl behind you? Is she your daughter?" Sherlock's face was filled with curiosity, and he looked at Price with a teasing look, as if waiting for some shocking gossip to surface. Could a seasoned Price be fooled by a rookie like Sherlock? A smile played on his face, and after glancing down at Sherlock condescendingly, he slowly answered Sherlock's question. "She's not my daughter, she's your child bride." Faced with Price's answer, Sherlock felt completely Spartan. Damn, the Qing dynasty has been gone for over 100 years, why are they still playing with the old dynasty's toys? Besides, this is her mother's lighthouse. Not to mention that Sherlock himself isn't some coppersmith, and even if you were, this little girl is old enough for Sherlock to give her a life sentence. Looking at Sherlock's completely Spartan look, Price finally laughed, patted Sherlock's shoulder, and spoke. "Okay, enough teasing. This is Lorna. A friend asked me to stay here for a while. You have so many rooms upstairs, you wouldn't object, would you?" It would have been fine if Price hadn't said anything. After he finished speaking, Sherlock's expression quickly changed from Spartan to that of an elderly man on the subway. He looked from the pretty girl to the gruff Price, and after a long pause, he spoke. "Nothing special, my dear Uncle Price. If I'm not mistaken, this is an underage girl." Sherlock emphasized the words underage and girl, as if to remind Price of something. But Price clearly misunderstood Sherlock's intention and proudly pointed to the object in the girl's hand. It was a pink AR series automatic rifle with a cute Hello Kitty design. Even the magazine had unicorn stickers on it. Seeing Price's seemingly proud expression, Sherlock felt his whole body sinking again. Was that what he meant? Sherlock's face was almost twisted into an awkward expression. "Uncle Price, what I mean is, you should send her to school. This beautiful Miss Lorna is coming back here in a spacious school bus, wearing a pretty little dress or something, carrying a backpack. She shouldn't be wearing small tactical clothing, a magazine rack, and a rifle like she's now. Who would teach a child that old how to shoot?" Price was particularly amused by Sherlock, whose expression looked like it was about to collapse. He ignored Sherlock and patted Lorna on the head. "Little Lorna, go back and get some rest and a shower. We'll have dinner soon. You're in for a treat today." Sherlock's cooking is delicious. After hearing Price's words, the still rather naive Lorna nodded expressionlessly and turned to head for the second-floor hallway. Only after Lorna disappeared at the stairs did Price become serious. "Lorna's identity is very special. A friend of mine brought her out of a laboratory." Sherlock interrupted Price before he could finish, asking in astonishment. "Sokovia?" Sherlock's interruption surprised Price, and then he looked at Sherlock and asked. "You know," Sherlock's question was purely a knee-jerk reaction. After all, Lorna's name, coupled with her green hair, meant even the dumbest Sherlock knew who this girl was, the North Star among mutants. But therein lay the problem. Sherlock had checked the world upon his journey and found no trace of mutants. The only ones with any connection to mutants were Quicksilver and Scarlet Witch. However, in the movie, these two were supposed to have gained their superpowers through the scepter containing the Mind Stone brought by Loki. So, when Price mentioned the laboratory, Sherlock instinctively thought of Sokovia, the country where Avengers 2 takes place, and it was this location that led to the civil war within the Avengers. But when facing Price, Sherlock couldn't explain exactly where he got the information. After pondering for a moment, he could only say with an awkward smile, "I only have a little understanding." "Please continue." Price rolled his eyes at Sherlock and didn't continue to dwell on why Sherlock knew this information. Lorna was the only child brought out of the lab. Who knows what those crazy scientists did to her, leaving her emotionally deprived to this day. And most importantly, I don't know how they managed to give her such unusual abilities. "Brat, I know you have a little secret too. I hope you can help Lorna train some time. After all, those rookies and I don't know how to play with these strange things." Price spoke with an unstoppable sadness in his eyes. Although Sherlock didn't know Price's past, their long time together had taught him one thing: his so-called friend was most likely dead. Because of this, Price had transferred almost all of his affection to the little girl, which was why he said these words to Sherlock. Although he understood Price, the uncle who had cared for him for so long and was almost like a father to him, Sherlock still broke out in a cold sweat when Price revealed his own little secret. "Well, Uncle Price, you know everything." Faced with Sherlock's probing, Price simply rolled his eyes before answering. "I know nothing. I just roughly guessed there was something a little different about you. After all, during those 7 years of training, the commotion you caused after taking leave was pretty significant in our opinion." After hearing Price's answer, Sherlock had no choice but to agree and give him an awkward smile. What else could he do? Chapter 48, Unusual Daily Life, Part 1. After that semi-frank conversation with Price that night, Price no longer objected to Sherlock contacting his clients. As Sherlock continued his interactions, he was surprised to discover something. Marvel's depths were truly profound, and its core theme was a dire situation. To use a somewhat inappropriate analogy, if the ordinary people of the Marvel Universe were like the surface of a vast ocean, then the Avengers, led by Tony, could be likened to the icebergs protruding above. Tall and imposing, they commanded everyone's admiration, towering above yet visible to all, like Hollywood stars. The terrifying question was, beneath these icebergs, beneath the murky surface, lay a vaster base, quietly submerged in the icy waters. If nothing unexpected happened, these beings below the surface would remain completely detached from the ordinary people above. However, that didn't mean they had no connection to Sherlock's gun shop. In just a few days, Sherlock saw a world he had never imagined. Gangs and the like were just minor fodder. The real powerhouses were the mercenary guilds and assassin groups like the Continental Hotel. These, along with information traffickers, SHIELD, and a handful of superpowered players, formed a vast underground world hidden beneath the ordinary world. In this realm, Sherlock even met a figure he had only existed in movies and TV series in his previous life, John Wick, known as the Night Stalker. He was the killer with the face of Keanu Reeves, who, because of a dog, went from one step to the next. After meeting him, Sherlock even forced himself to take a photo with his killer, staring at the strange looks from Price, Soap, and the others. Although John Wick looked bewildered in the photo, Sherlock felt incredibly satisfied. How Sherlock came to know this killer was quite dramatic. Who could have imagined that his small gun shop and the training base behind it would be so connected to all those underground forces? After just a few days of contact, Sherlock was astonished to discover that his training ground was the only peaceful zone recognized by the entire underworld. The gun shop specialized in weapon modification and sales, while the training ground provided training and the cultivation and instruction of new recruits. Throughout the underworld, no one, whether intelligence dealers, assassins, or mercenaries, could operate within the weapon shop's perimeter, lest they be hunted down by all factions. After all, no one wanted their newbie village to be ruined, right? Beyond that, the struggle between the various factions would ensue. For the safety of the newbies, even the most basic information was forbidden. The only activities permitted were weapon purchases, modification, training, and paid instruction. John Wick, naturally, was one of the trainees at the grounds, occasionally acting as a guest instructor to earn a small fortune. Sherlock had, of course, met John Wick at the training ground, and upon learning of Sherlock's identity, John Wick hadn't rejected Sherlock's friendship. Sherlock also learned something different from the movies. While John Wick had a beloved wife, unlike the movies, she was exceptionally healthy. They even lived not far from Sherlock's gun shop. Knowing this, Sherlock breathed a sigh of relief. After all, this John Wick wouldn't be slaying his way through the underworld like in the movies. After all, his home was somewhat connected to the Continental Hotel. And Sherlock was genuinely worried it might be robbed one day. Of course, besides these shocking facts, the only thing that really troubled Sherlock was the little girl, Lorna. It's unclear if she took Price's teasing about a child bride seriously during their meeting, or if it was because Sherlock's cooking was so delicious, or if she saw Sherlock as a kindred spirit with abilities not found in ordinary people. Anyway, after dinner that night, Lorna had become obsessed with Sherlock, practically following him wherever he went. This made Price jealous for a while, but after Sherlock offered numerous favors and signed numerous humiliating treaties, Price finally managed to suppress his anger at his daughter being abducted by the yellow-haired man. Of course, Sherlock didn't forget Price's promise and began to work on training Lorna. According to memories from a past life, Lorna's ability must have been inherited from Magneto, the ability to manipulate metal. After closing each day, Sherlock would take Lorna to the training grounds, instructing her to use her powers to clear the eggshells and bullets stuck in the walls. At first, Lorna struggled to utilize her powers, even using them all night. Ultimately, Sherlock used magic to clear the grounds. Fortunately, Sherlock possessed a vast knowledge of magic. Since he couldn't train Lorna's abilities like muscles, he decided to use magic. So, thanks to Sherlock's intervention, little Lorna received her own magic book. Mental power training and control, detailed explanation of metal composition, electricity and magnetism, the fourth fundamental force of the universe, advanced mathematics, metal smelting and development, and world geography, detailed explanation of metal minerals in various regions. It could be said that aside from the first book, which had a slight connection to magic, the rest had nothing to do with it at all. Even Price and the others exclaimed, "Wow," but Sherlock, a magician, had brought out these books. The first one was actually a manual for training magic. Coupled with Sherlock's packaging, little Lorna was convinced they were Sherlock's magic books. Furthermore, every time Lorna applied the formulas and knowledge from the books, she succeeded perfectly in completing Sherlock's training. This led to Lorna being convinced, even though she didn't understand the formula's meaning or origin, that they were pure magic formulas. Once she mastered them, she would surely be able to wield her own magic with Sherlock's unfettered freedom. Because of this strange belief, Price and the others, Sky, The ostensible gun shop clerk, and Sherlock all frequently saw little Lorna diligently studying those ancient-looking, yet incredibly advanced magic books. Sherlock's uncles, who knew little Lorna's background, were terrified by her results. They made a one-handed six gesture whenever they saw her, and were deeply disgusted by Sherlock's childish trickery. Sherlock dismissed this as indifferent, saying, "Just tell me if it works, that's all." The only one who seemed concerned was perhaps Skye, the naive young woman. This poor orphan, now employed and provided with food and shelter, felt bad for sitting idle behind the cash register every day after witnessing little Lorna's efforts. With Sherlock's approval and a month's salary advance, Skye, driven by her passion, found a second-hand set of programming books and began diligently studying them. Regarding the inexplicable behavior of the two women in the gun shop, Sherlock could only wave his hand and say, "Just be happy." If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelis. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 49, Unusual Daily Life, Part 2. For a whole month, Sherlock's life was like that of an ancient young master, a daily routine of teasing maids and listening to music in brothels. At one point, Sherlock almost forgot he was in the Marvel Universe. On weekdays, after the guests had left, Sherlock's greatest pleasure was to tease the still young Lolita Lorna, exploring her true spirit and completely crushing her in every way, from her abilities to her physical prowess and ultimately her intelligence. He basically teased Lorna into a frenzy, unleashing her supernatural powers to manipulate a multitude of bullet shells and projectiles to attack Sherlock. But as a magician, Sherlock was no match for the little girl's physical attacks. He almost always dispatched Lorna with a single wave of his wand, even occasionally turning incoming bullet shells and projectiles into petals with remarkable grace. While she looked incredibly beautiful, even standing amidst the sea of dancing petals was strikingly handsome, she had a mouth. Even without speaking, the scene was incredibly beautiful, like something out of an idle drama, captivating Lorna. But the moment she opened her mouth, her blood pressure soared, and every petal was a naked mockery of Lorna. If her superpowers couldn't defeat Sherlock, the sixth brother, Lorna would sometimes get so angry that she'd wave her fists and threaten a fight to the death. But how could Lorna, with her tiny arms and legs, stand up against Sherlock, a 6 feet 9 inches tall man with 8-pack abs? She was often easily controlled by Sherlock, no matter how hard she tried, unable to inflict any harm. Sherlock even occasionally played tricks on Lorna, giving her a taste of zero gravity. Whenever Sherlock manipulated Lorna, she would pout and go to Old Man Price, a man of steel and toughness, a virtual elder to Sherlock. So, Skye, sitting at the cashier, often saw little Lorna pouting as she headed to Price's office. A moment later, Price, standing 6 feet 9 inches and weighing 180 kilograms, would dash towards the training grounds with a scowl on his face, a cigar between his lips, and a pink AR-series rifle with a Hello Kitty print in his hand. He was followed by a smug little Lorna. Then, from the training grounds, the sound of gunfire, like pouring beans, would echo, mingling with Lorna's silvery laughter, Price's curses, and Sherlock's strange cries. With Sherlock's recovery, even the fiercest fights between Price and Sherlock would remain unscathed. Over time, it even developed into Sherlock single-handedly challenging Price, Soap, and Ghost. Their weapons had even evolved from simple light weapons to heavier firepower. Don't ask why Gates and Zhao didn't participate. To avoid a real beating, Sherlock begged them profusely, ultimately buying them a year's supply of Tony's fine wine. Only then did they agree to refrain from fighting. Of course, given all this, Sherlock, a man of fun, couldn't let Skye, a simple cashier, off. But Skye had grown up on the streets, having seen all sorts of scoundrels. Sherlock's sword-selling escapades met an unprecedented setback with Skye, whose response was a textbook example of how to handle a scoundrel's mischief. It sounds complicated, but it boils down to simply ignoring Sherlock. No matter how Sherlock played pranks, Skye always wore a meaningful smile. Even when she was pranked, she remained calm, changing clothes when necessary and reporting when necessary. She then smiled as Sherlock, embarrassed, choked on the ground. And then, with Price holding her back, apologized to Skye. Over time, Sherlock gave up on such pranks with Skye. Of course, Sherlock, a man of pleasure, couldn't give up his time in the business, and at Price's suggestion, he occasionally served as a novice instructor. Whenever a new recruit arrived from an organization, Sherlock would do so at Price's request. Price's novice training program was quite simple and crude. 3 1-centimeter thick alloy targets were given to the newbies, one for each pistol, rifle, submachine gun, shotgun, or sniper rifle. Within a month, with no limit on ammunition, each target had a hole. Those who passed the training program were allowed to proceed to the next stage of training. Those who didn't complete the 3 holes within a month were dismissed without a refund. Sherlock was visibly irritated when he learned about this program. Remember, Sherlock's training wasn't as rigorous. He roughly estimated that it would take about 10,000 rounds of ammunition to create a hole in a single target. Price's move essentially eliminated the need for newbies to practice their marksmanship, posing a significant challenge. Anyone who passed a novice exam could be considered a crack marksman. Putting aside these mundane details, Sherlock's greatest achievement was perhaps becoming acquainted with John Wick, a man who bore a striking resemblance to Keanu Reeves. After their rapport, he even visited John Wick's home, where he met his wife and the legendary dog that sparked his massacre. Furthermore, he even experienced John Wick's legendary Mustang. It's worth noting that while John Wick's Mustang might not be as fast as modern sports cars, and might even be inferior to Sherlock's Shelby Raptor, simply driving it down the street was undoubtedly more impressive than Sherlock's. This was perhaps one of the few things John Wick did that was so high profile. For the past month, Sherlock had been living a life of luxury, seemingly never wanting to leave. But remember, this was the Marvel Universe. Even if you didn't want trouble, it was likely to find you. So, just when Sherlock was indulging in such a happy daily life, Tony showed up uninvited. Tony completely broke Sherlock's mentality and made Sherlock certain of one thing. Damn it, from now on, Tony would definitely be the one being teased in front of this fun-loving person. Chapter 50 Tony the Profiteer. Sherlock's story of this idea began one morning. It was a beautiful, sunny morning, and thanks to Sky, Sherlock didn't have to wake up early to open the shop and work the cashier. So, Sherlock slept until noon, then woke up, ate a quick meal, packed up, and then leisurely went downstairs, still thinking about how to have fun that day. Outside Sherlock's gun shop, the roar of a car engine erupted. The loud noise practically echoed throughout the shop, startling not only Sherlock but even the men in the office who weren't training. As they hurried through the gun shop's door, they saw a 6x6 pickup truck modified from a Mercedes-Benz G63. At a glance, Sherlock could tell that the off-road beast speeding towards the gun shop had been modified to the highest standards. It's no exaggeration to say that Sherlock's Shelby Raptor Baja Edition parked at the entrance was likely a fraction of the price of the modified 6x6. The off-road beast raced towards Sherlock's shop at breakneck speed. As it neared the entrance, it drifted and spun, coming to a steady stop. Looking at the massive beast before him, Sherlock almost felt like it was out to cause trouble. And not just Sherlock, but even Sherlock's uncles and Sky shared the same thought. Everyone unconsciously reached for their weapons, ready for the ensuing clash. But as the car door opened, the tense pre-battle atmosphere vanished without a trace. The reason was simple. Tony's personal driver, the chubby, happy old man, stepped out of the driver's seat. After exiting the car, he quickly strode to the back, opened the door, and Tony, wearing sunglasses and dressed in an unusually flamboyant outfit, calmly stepped out of the back seat of the 6x6. As Tony got out of the car, he even glanced at Sherlock's Shelby, parked outside the shop. A smirk of disdain spread across his face, unconcealed. Son of a rich bastard, this was the unanimous thought of Sherlock's uncles, Sky. As for Sherlock, he was too livid to complain. Sherlock saw this guy as pure provocation. Damn it, I know you're rich, but showing off is wrong. And Sherlock knew one thing, Tony had no interest in off-road pickup trucks. He preferred sports cars. He was the one who liked off-road pickup trucks. He bought a top-of-the-line off-road pickup truck and showed it to him as pure show-off. Sherlock even wondered if Tony was just getting back from buying a car, the first thing he did after returning with Tony in his armor. As soon as Tony spoke, Sherlock was immediately certain that Tony's act was pure revenge. Ah, my dear nephew, it's been a long time since we last met. As your uncle, I've done a great deal for you. I even had to spend a small fortune to buy a large pickup truck to get you what you requested. Hearing Tony's sarcastic words, Sherlock felt his blood pressure soar. At that moment, He finally empathized with Lorna, the victim of his frequent pranks. Struggling to suppress his anger, Sherlock gave a forced smile to the showy Tony standing before him and replied in the same sarcastic tone. "Ah, my dear uncle, that's truly a big trouble for you. Could you please let me see what gives you the courage to do this?" Tony remained unfazed by Sherlock's sarcastic tone. He pointed behind him into the truck bed before slowly answering Sherlock's question. "My dear nephew, I don't like your tone just now. I suggest you wait until after you've seen the truck bed before speaking to me." Sherlock rolled his eyes at Tony's boastful behavior, deciding to ignore the elderly man, still fuming with excitement, and headed for the back truck. Once there, after lifting the tarpaulin covering the truck bed, even Sherlock couldn't help but spit out insults. "Holy shit, Tony, you robbed the Federal Reserve." Sherlock's excitement was fueled by the sheer shock of the scene inside. The entire truck bed was crammed with the gold bars. 1 kilogram bars were neatly stacked in the back truck bed. Even lifting a corner of the tarpaulin revealed a dazzling golden glow that stunned Sherlock. Seeing Sherlock's astonishment, Tony's expression was unabashedly smug. He then stepped forward and patted Sherlock on the shoulder. "Look, young man, you still have a lot to learn." Seeing Tony still putting on airs, Sherlock rolled his eyes in annoyance. Only then did he get to know the details. This understanding wasn't a big deal. Knowing the truth, Sherlock couldn't help but give Tony a thumbs up. "If we were to talk about profiteers, it's you, Tony the big shit." The reason was simple. Tony's truckload of gold bars came from that vengeful idiot at SYNOPSIS. When Sherlock left, he left Tony 20 bottles of antidote, 10 bottles of white moss, and 2 bottles of polyjuice potion. Aside from the 10 bottles Tony kept for himself, he sold the rest to the black egg from SYNOPSIS. Sherlock had sold them to Tony at double the price from the vending machine in his library, and Tony, who has a bid over the price, sold them to SYNOPSIS several times over. There was nearly 1.5 tons of gold in the entire back box. Tony even reinforced the back box of his pickup truck to pull all the gold there. You have to remember that the potion sold to SYNOPSIS was only 22 bottles at most. Even if the price of polyjuice potion was slightly higher, such a quantity was still too exaggerated. Seeing Sherlock's stunned expression, Tony felt his vanity greatly satisfied for a moment, and then he began to urge Sherlock to put the gold away quickly. Sherlock naturally didn't hold back and performed the gold vanishing trick on the spot. Seeing the back box that became empty in an instant, Sherlock's uncles were unusually calm. The only one who was not calm was Skye. For a moment, Skye even began to doubt her own worldview. End of this chapter. Thank you very much for reaching the end. Don't forget to like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription, or donation encourages us to continue. Thanks to everyone. See you in the next video.